A good Tuesday morning to you, and welcome to Real Talk on this April 13th. Ryan Jesperson here with you alongside the show's technical producer, Samuel G. Brooks. So good morning to you.
Hey, good morning,
How are
everyone.
you feeling?
I'm good.
Feeling good?
I got really enthralled by the Yukon election last night.
Ooh.
It is, first of all, the Yukon only has 19 seats in their legislature. Currently, and this is the last time that I checked, it's a tie. There is one seat undecided, which is also a tie at 78 votes apiece. And by Yukon electoral law, this election might literally be decided by a name drawn out of a hat.
Which is maybe arguably how all elections should be done.
There's a really good freakonomics about that.
Depending on who you talk to,
Yeah.
I'm sure people would have all kinds of ideas on how we could determine who makes the laws of the land.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of a cool story to keep an eye on.
That is what's been on my mind today. It was on the news. It was on CBC, which I just had on in the background yesterday, and I just got hooked on it.
Good stuff.
It was so fun to watch.
We're going to be talking coming up in about 10 minutes time with he's not a myth buster. That's not what he wouldn't prefer to be introduced that way. And I'm sure that he would characterize himself differently. And maybe we'll ask him whether or not he would characterize himself as a myth buster. But Timothy Caulfield, you've seen him on the show before. He's a well-published and well-read author. He's hosted his own Netflix series. He's the Canada Research Chair in Health Law and Policy and a Trudeau Fellow, a professor in the Faculty of Law and School of Public Health, and a research director at the Health Law Institute at the University of Alberta. Sometimes I read bios like that just to keep me motivated in my own personal life. You know, if I'm ever like, I have all my laundry folded, the backyard, the lawn is mowed, and I made time to have dinner with my family, I feel like I'm nailing it. And then you read a bio like this and you go, I've got some room for improvement.
Yeah, I felt like that last weekend. I got a couple like small construction projects finished, and then I did my taxes, which took like 2 days of spreadsheets. And I felt so proud of myself afterwards. And then, we roll in hot to 3 researchers the next day and be like, yeah, never mind. My bio doesn't matter.
But we can still be proud of ourselves in our own way. We just can't really proclaim it from the rooftops. We have to recognize that there's sort of like different tiers of status here based on achievement, intelligence, intellect, and the like. And you and I, well, hey, listen, I'm not even going to put us on the same level, Sam, because I don't even do my own taxes. If I did, it would be a worse disaster than the situation it is. I'm not the receipts in the shoebox guy. I'm not that bad. I have all my receipts. I have everything well organized with the binder clips. And so I'll have meals and entertainment, studio expenses, things like this, all with clips. They're kind of organized. But once I start looking at all the forms and all that, I go, it seems to me if I put the wrong number in the wrong line, I could end up owing a lot more. Maybe I'll just get somebody else to do it.
I'm too cheap to hire an accountant.
Yeah.
That's my thing.
Yeah. Well,
so I learned to do bookkeeping myself.
Yeah, but you could also have someone say, I'm too cheap to have somebody change my own oil. So they change their own oil. So they change their own oil. Not everyone's Samuel G. Brooks. Someone says, I'm not going to shell out to get my oil changed. They change their own oil. They forget to put it in the right way, and then they blow a $6,000 motor. Like, what can you afford? What can you not afford? These are my little life hacks, I think. I try to find little life hacks.
When I first got my janky old falling apart truck that sat on a farm for 10 years before I got it, I could not figure out for the life of me this oil leak, and I finally pulled the filter off and realized whoever had last changed the oil jammed the filter in without removing the seal from the previous filter. So there was an oil filter seal just like crooked in the middle of everything.
There you go. The professionals would not make that mistake.
Well, that is true.
I got great advice from a friend of mine named Marshall. We call him Marsh. And he said to me, when it comes to having your own business or running your own business or building your own team, whatever in life, he says, you should only do what only you can do and delegate everything else. You should only do what only you can do and delegate everything else. And I thought that's striking. Now he's got a bit of a bigger team. His team's a little more impressive. He has like departments in his business. But, I thought that was good advice.
I have just on like broader scale, I have a lot of admiration, to people or to companies that are like their kind of ethos is do one thing really well.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just like when people have that level of specialty, you always You always get great results out of that.
In a way, this is kind of a subtle tee-up for our first segment today. In a way. I guess what we're talking about is when you should attempt to do things yourself and when you should leave it to the experts. Oh my gosh, we couldn't have even planned this so beautifully. More than 500,000 people, way more than 500,000 people have watched a video from an Edmonton-based, he calls himself a mental wealth coach, not mental health, mental wealth coach. And he would describe himself as a mental health advocate. Earnestly. I don't know him personally. I did speak with him on the phone yesterday. A guy by the name of Caulfield Dr, and he's released a video on his Instagram. Last I saw, about 600,000 people have watched it. It's probably more now. His name is exploding for a few different reasons. I mean, so much so that he released a subsequent video yesterday. He's talking about COVID-19. And he starts by saying, basically, listen, you're used to me being positive and, being chipper and happy. And this video is going to be a little bit different. And he gets into his assessment of how the pandemic has been mismanaged and some of the risks that people are running. And then he starts to drop some numbers and some data and some statistics. And let me just say, the message has been celebrated by thousands and thousands and thousands of people. And it's being absolutely crushed and slammed and ripped by maybe just as many or maybe more or maybe less, or I don't know, and that's not really the point. The point is that there are thousands of comments on the video. It's being shared all over the place. He's obviously gained a pretty significant following as of late. Some of his critics are saying, well, that's why he's doing this. Others are saying he cares about people. So like I said, I talked to him on the phone yesterday, and we're talking about whether or not it's going to make sense to get him on the show and what the context would have to look like and what sort of a fact-checking mechanism would be in place. Let me just say the conversation has been happening. And he knows that we're having this segment here today. I'm going to show you portions of the video, and we're going to look to Timothy Caulfield, professor at the University of Alberta and published author, and Dr. Shazma Mithani as well, who's been a great friend of the show, and an ER doctor, an ER physician out of the Royal Alexandra Hospital, which if you don't live in Edmonton, you're not from Alberta, the Royal Alex, or strangely so, as a lot of people call it the Royal Alec. That's one of the weird things about Edmonton.
I know that.
A lot of longtime Edmontonians call the Royal Alexandra the Royal Alec, and I've never wrapped my mind around it, but I don't want to get off onto a rabbit hole on this. It's just one of those things locally that it's never really made sense.
But you didn't want to get off onto a rabbit hole.
You know what I'm saying? I'm wrapping it up with a bow.
Okay.
This is what I do. I wrap things up with a bow, I put them under the tree, and I move on. Dr. Mithani is going to join us to talk about kind of just the front line when somebody's admitted to the ER before they go into ICU, whatever the case is. She's seeing it. She's seeing it on the front line. She's been on the front line of the pandemic for a year. And we're going to get into some of the assertions made in the video. I'm curious for your take. And then I want to broaden the conversation. We've designed a show today that has lots of breathing room. Because a lot of times, if you look back through our show's archives via our YouTube channel or our podcast, you can subscribe to both of them. You see what I did there? You're going to see that sometimes we've got 7, 8, 9 guests. I think our busiest show, we had 9 guests over the course of the 2 hours or so. It doesn't leave any talk time. It doesn't leave time for us to dive into the live chat or to get to the I probably, and again, we plant trees. Don't worry, we plant trees. But the dozens of emails we print off before every show, as a matter of fact, I got 8 of them shortlisted today, and I want to get to all of them. We don't leave ourselves time for that. And the whole point of this show, it's called Real Talk, is to have a conversation. We'll get into some of Caulfield Dr assertions around, comorbidities and mental health and diet and exercise and cardiovascular capability and what can shield you or protect you from COVID-19 and what cannot, and what does the evidence say, and is his video really dangerous, or is it, in his words, his truth? Is everyone entitled to an opinion? You're going to say, well, obviously, of course. So I want to talk about this because I've got letters from people that are saying, I assume. As a matter of fact, Real Talkers, can I say this? This past weekend, it was my birthday weekend, had a wonderful weekend. Family was amazing. Obviously, we're locked down, our little unit. So we had a modest little and wonderful and heart-filling birthday weekend. But I was not all over the internet. I was not on Instagram. I was not sort of checking in to see what everybody was in a flap about or what everybody was inspired by about. It just wasn't that kind of a weekend for me. So it was actually Real Talkers that put this Caulfield Dr video on my radar. Letters, like people emailing in to talk@ryanjesperson.com saying, I'm assuming you're going to talk about this. Number one, please get this guy on the show. Wow. Like he's saying what I've been wanting to say, or he's the one that finally has the stones to say this. And then a bunch of emails from people that are going, I assume that you're going to bring somebody on to rebut all of the inaccuracies and misinformation on this video. It's dangerous. A couple people wrote in specifically to say, please don't have Kaler Betts on the show. So I want to talk about that. I mean, this show before has been in this muck and mire with critics, right around platforming. I think of some of the guests that we've had on the show, and people have criticized me and criticized the show, saying, you are platforming these people. You're platforming these dangerous points of view. And for me, I mean, someone with 15 years broadcast experience, 20 years experience in media, newspaper included, the idea of platforming, I mean, we used to refer to it in different ways. There were some obvious circumstances. Would a talk host have on the, a grand wizard of the Ku Klux Klan to debate whether or not, all ethnicities truly are equal? We're going to hear from one side, we're going to hear from the other, and we're going to put it to a vote. Check out our Twitter poll. Like, obviously not. Obviously not. Did the Holocaust happen, or is it a hoax? We go to one expert who says it did, and then the other who says it didn't. And they'll each get 2 minutes, and then and then you put them on equal and people go, what the? No. But if somebody says, instead of the CERB, the $2,000 a month, what I think that government should do is, this or this or this, an alternative perspective. Or hydroxychloroquine. People started talking about that, right? And that sort of ties itself as an issue to the people that talked about it. Danielle Smith, former talk radio host in our home province of Alberta. When I had Danielle on the show here a while ago, one of our most listened to episodes, by the way, in the show's history, top 5, people are saying, you're platforming somebody that promoted hydroxychloroquine. You're platforming her. And I'm sitting there going, we had a really interesting and pretty candid conversation about a whole bunch of things. It's important to investigate assertions. It's important to fact check. It's important to provide rebuttal space when someone has put something out out to public discourse that can serve to be divisive or even in some cases harmful. It's important to have these conversations. It's important for a show like this to have integrity. But do we simply suffocate or squeeze the oxygen out of these types of things and pretend like they don't exist? Like, so I guarantee right now some people are going, the fact that Ryan's even saying this guy's name, Kaler Betts, is drawing people to his Instagram, which means his video is going to get more views, which means Ryan's part of the problem. You see what I'm saying? So I want to have a conversation about that. We've got some great emails. I've got one here from Kim. Kim just sent this in like 8 hours ago. Maybe this is keeping Kim up at night. She literally, the subject line, please help, what is the truth? And Kim writes in and says, Ryan, I don't know where to turn. I'm being inundated with information found in a video. Now, she's actually linking to another video that's just been released. Some Alberta physicians, some former physicians and surgeons, a couple of them. And Kim says, I'd be really curious to know what your collection of experts have to say about this latest video I've just been sent. I'm exhausted, says Kim, in trying to figure out the truth about COVID. Up to now, I've believed what our mainstream media and what local medical experts and what political leaders are telling us. I have no idea who these 2 doctors in this video are. And if all the medical facts they present are true, I really don't know what they're talking about, but it sure sounds legit, says Kim. Please have some experts watch this video to determine if it's accurate. Why is it so hard? Why are the voices that say COVID is a hoax and lockdowns are unnecessary, why are those voices getting louder and louder? And how can the average person hope to sort it out? That from Kim, received to our inbox at 10:01 p.m. Mountain Time yesterday. This is putting a lot of people in a wind wobble. It's important, I think, to be talking about these. I think it's really important to give people the information that they need, the tools that they need to be able to, for starters, You talk right now about the idea of fake news and sources and almost marginalized communities, people being pushed out. We talked about, Twitter deplatforming, Donald Trump's account being canceled. Some people celebrate it. Some people say it's 1984. Some people say that Jack Dorsey and Twitter have totally overstepped. Others have said Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg haven't done enough to combat this type of thing. If you talk to experts about this, one of the first things that every single one of them will say is that we need to teach people, and this starts probably, at home with young kids and into elementary school. An intuitive, modern curriculum would probably include angles on this in elementary, junior, and senior high school on how to determine the validity or how to determine the credibility of a source. And you might sit there and say, well, that's pretty obvious. It's not obvious to everybody. It's not obvious to everybody that when somebody sends you a link and you click on it and you read it and it looks like a pretty reputable news site. It looks pretty good. The graphic design's pretty good. There's not a lot of spelling mistakes. Do you automatically check the URL, the web address? And if it says whatever it says, globalmail.com, globalnews.ca, cbc.ca, whatever it says, okay, interesting. And then, okay, well, let's read on. If it says Herbie6969.yz. Some random web address, should we maybe immediately see a red flag? That's one example out of a million. Should we maybe see a red flag there? So I hope to have these conversations. I want to start them today. Or let me say continue them today, because we have had them on the show before. I'm curious to know what our experts are going to say and what you have to say on our live chat as well. Plus, we'll be checking our inbox, talk at ryanjesperson.com, and, of course, our Twitter hashtag, RealTalkRJ, which is powered by Park Power. This show is proudly presented by the team at Bitcoin Well. And I want to let you know, coming up in about an hour and 15 minutes, we're going to talk to Bitcoin Well's founder and CEO, Adam O'Brien. You've probably seen Bitcoin right now at its highest value in history, and Bloomberg's up with a huge projection on it. At the same time, some people say you can stick a fork in it, and it's almost dead because China's introducing digital currency. And some people, some market experts, some currency watchers say that China's digital currency could bury Bitcoin for good. I love it. We're going to try to sort it out. That's the whole point. It's going to be a great show. Adam O'Brien coming up. You can learn more about Bitcoin Well under the sponsors tab at ryanjesperson.com.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
All right, Timothy Caulfield, Dr. Shazma Mithani coming up in just a moment. Kaylor Betts is this Edmonton-based mental wealth coach that's put out an Instagram video that's closing in on 750,000 views. We're going to show you a little bit of the video. We're going to bring in our experts, and we're going to have a conversation about facts. And so, Sam, if you could, the video itself is about 8.5, 9 minutes long. We've taken just a couple clips from it. Why don't we roll one here to give people an idea of what we're talking about?
All we can talk about is wear more masks, like 1 mask, 2 masks, 3, wear 9 masks, and then let's throw them into the ocean, which is probably going to be a bigger problem than anything else. And let's shut down our businesses, let's ruin people's mental health and livelihood, let's completely go into isolation. We're not biologically made to isolate ourselves from social connection. It makes us sick, which leads me into my next issue that I want to talk about, mental health. Talk to a psych doc or a nurse right now. They'll tell you that the healthcare systems are overwhelmed with mental health patients. I'm not anti-vax, I'm not anti-mask, I'm not anti-isolation, social distancing. Those things have their place. I'm anti-stupid. And the approach we're taking is stupid. And if you don't see that by now, keep digging.
Timothy Caulfield is the author of Is Gwyneth Paltrow Wrong About Everything? He's the Canada Research Chair in Health Law and Policy, Research Director at the Health Law Institute, University of Alberta. Tim, it's great to have you on the show. We'll also welcome in Dr. Shazma Mithani, who's been a great friend of Real Talk since inception. She's an ER doctor at Edmonton's Royal Alexandra Hospital. And if I understand correctly, Doc, you're actually on night shift right now, too, which means you got up probably in the equivalent of the middle of the night to talk to our audience. So let me begin by extending our most sincere gratitude. Thanks for being here to the both of you.
Thanks for having me on.
Tim, why don't we start with you? Kaylor Betts, the video, we're going to get into some of the specifics and what he's talking about, but the general premise of it. I was telling our audience when you were waiting in the bullpen there, I mean, we're getting emails from people saying, please have him on. We're getting emails from people saying, please don't have him on. Where do you land on discussions like these?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. In general, I do not think we should have these voices out there, because it does lead to something that's called false balance. And there's really good evidence to back this up. This is his positions are fringe. They're not supported by evidence at all. And if you give him a platform on the show like this, it becomes one argument against another. And you touched on it in the introduction. And we know there's good research that suggests that false balance can have a really bad impact on things like vaccination intention. They've actually done exact studies on that topic and have found that false balance reduces people's intention to get vaccinated. So, I think this can be really problematic. A good example would be Jenny McCarthy on the Larry King show. It was Jenny McCarthy telling her story about her child getting autism from the vaccine, a complete myth. But what do we remember from that show? It's Jenny McCarthy, Ryan. That's what we remember. She was sitting next to 3 experts from the CDC who probably spent their life, studying vaccines, and they're going, no, this isn't true. But we remember Jenny McCarthy in part because she has this compelling story to tell. And in this video, you see that also this wellness coach also has this story to tell. Now, the other thing I think is really important to highlight here, Ryan, is this is a rage video, right? That's what this is. He's not introducing any new topics. This is stuff, I follow the literature very, very closely. I follow the public discourse very, very closely. This is stuff that people have been talking about for a year. So there's no new topics here, right? This idea about mental health. This is about questioning the public health measures, right? And implicit in it is his suggestions, which is exercise in his metabolic health in 9 days, is a better solution than the solutions that have been advocated for by experts. Now, look, this is incredibly complicated. And it's often portrayed like the experts aren't, I've actually involved in a lot of national public health discussions on this, as if they're unaware of this data. People are aware of this data, right? They're trying to make balance. They're trying to balance mental health, physical activity, exercise, the economy against the public health measures that are needed to get us through this. It's not easy. People make mistakes, but people are trying to make this balance. What this video is about is rage. It's playing on people's fear. It's playing on people's frustration. And it is also about brand building, no doubt about it.
Okay, so and feel free to jump in, both of you. I want this to be a candid conversation, like we were out for coffees, and so you don't have to wait for me to ask you a question. And please feel free to disagree with me as well. And maybe a tiny little part of me is going to be devil's advocate here, but I want you to know I approach this sincerely. I'm not trying to push buttons and get ratings. I mean, it wouldn't hurt if 600,000 people watched this video. But seriously, Tim, if you say what this is about is questioning public health measures, doctor, people will say, what's wrong with that? All of a sudden, we're not allowed to question public health measures? That sounds a little Orwellian to me.
I think it's always appropriate to question things. The problem with this situation is the propagation of complete false facts, right? And so questioning is not the issue here. It's using his platform to continue to propagate misinformation, to cherry pick facts, to take things out of context. One of the examples that he used was this often misquoted CDC fact about 94% of COVID patients who died had other health conditions. I mean, he's talking about comorbidities and things like high blood pressure. I mean, we've talked about this before. Something like high blood pressure is not always in your control and should not be a death sentence from getting COVID. But then he refuses to look at things like other things that the CDC says, for example, like the efficacy of masking, of double masking, for example, of the appropriateness of public health measures in reducing the spread of COVID-19. And so, yes, I think it's reasonable to question, but you need to actually use the appropriate data to be well informed and to not spread misinformation in situations like this.
Okay, let's talk about, we do have that clip pulled, Doctor, that you just mentioned. So to give our audience that maybe hasn't seen this yet an idea of what we're talking about, and then Tim will throw it hot to you. Here's another portion of that video from Kaylor Betts.
94% of the people that have died of COVID, just under 4 other health conditions and other causes of death. You know, the problem is we live in a system, and this is not a conspiracy theory. It is so evident and right in front of our face. We live in a system that rewards and incentivizes when people stay sick. The governments get more power, the pharmaceutical companies make more money. We need to start living in a system that actually incentivizes and rewards when people get better. And we don't, and it's embarrassing.
So we'll talk about the comorbidities. Dr. Mithani just touched on it there, Tim, but people are going to say, well, all he's talking about is promoting health, rewarding people for getting better as opposed to staying sick. What's wrong with that?
That's not what he's saying. It's interesting because, of course, there's this false dichotomy that individuals like this, and he's not the only one. A lot of people do this. They create this false dichotomy that you are either within the medical establishment, like my friend Shazma, and she's like only about drugs and only about, dealing with symptoms, or you're on the other side, which is about wellness and fitness. And that's just a false dichotomy. Every single expert I know, my wife's a family physician, they emphasize fitness and mental health and wellness, right? That's first, this false dichotomy that he's trying to create. Secondly, there's just the implication here, let's be really clear. The implication is that if you are not fit, right? And if you are not in the video, he talks about the things you're supposed to do to be fit. It's kind of your fault that you got COVID, right? It's kind of your fault if you are a person with obesity, if you're a person that has mobility issues, because you're not being fit and you're not doing the kind of things that he does to be fit. Because he talks about that. He says, I'm this fit person, and you wonder why I'm so fit, why I'm so obsessed with fitness. Well, I'm staying out of the hospital. It allows a hospital bed to be available for someone else. Think of what the implication is, that it's your fault that you didn't do these things. Now, look, something like obesity, incredibly complex condition, right? It's a incredibly complex. It has to do with socioeconomics, it has to do with your food environment, it has to do with your genetics, it has to do with your microbiome, it has to go on and on and on. This is a topic I've actually worked on and written about, and he's sort of blaming them. Now, do we need to talk about exercise and lifestyle more? Absolutely. And Ryan, I've talked about it on your show. This is something I've advocated for decades, right? But being fit is not going to magically boost your immune system. It's not going to keep you from getting COVID, and that is the clear message in his video, right? That's the clear message, that we should be focusing on this. And if we did what he wanted, this 9 days of metabolic health, you're not going to need the lockdown. That's the message, right? And that plays to the rage that is out there and the people that are frustrated with the lockdown. Zero evidence to support that message.
Doctor, one of the assertions that he makes in the video, again, might be something where someone would say, well, it's kind of hard to disagree with that. He says, one of the things the federal government, he says, instead of plugging so much money into so many things, the federal government should have made healthier, nutritious food available for more people, especially lower income people that can't afford the healthier food, that maybe get steered more toward the fast food or maybe not eating at all, what have you. But there's also the bigger picture there, which is implying or suggesting that a more nutritious diet or a healthier diet could protect you from COVID-19, right? And that's something that I think that's important that we talk about. You're seeing people in the ER. You're seeing the triage. You're seeing what is landing people in some pretty scary circumstances. Are some of these people healthy eaters? Can you take us into what COVID means, what the implications are, and how it affects people?
Sure. And just to kind of play off what Tim was saying there as well. I mean, of course, a healthy lifestyle and healthy eating and diet and exercise, those are all important things. That is not going to be what solves this pandemic, and that is not going to protect you from getting COVID-19. All of the measures that are put in place, the non-pharmaceutical interventions like distancing, masking, hand washing, that is what is going to protect us from getting COVID-19 and spreading it. In terms of the assertion of being healthy and being fit, preventing me from landing in hospital and preventing me from getting COVID-19. Unfortunately, as much as I would like for that to be true, it's simply not, especially with the variants of concern becoming the more predominant strain now and being the dominant strain. We in the emergency department are seeing much younger and healthy people without any comorbidities having to come into hospital, having to come into the intensive care unit. This third wave is a completely different beast, and we're seeing young, healthy people who are coming into hospital needing our help. And so, unfortunately, it's not just a matter of lifestyle changes here. This is something where the evidence does not show that, and the evidence does show what it does take to prevent COVID-19 infection.
Ryan, if I could jump in, if being fit kept you from getting COVID, the NFL, the NHL, Lewis Hamilton, who I love, I'm a big F1 fan. Boy, they I guess they were just unlucky, right? All these really fit people Lewis Hamilton is obsessed with his health. He's absolutely obsessed with his health. He got COVID. And of course, we're not just talking about, well, the answer will be, well, they got COVID, but they didn't get sick. Yeah, but they still got COVID. They became part of the problem of spreading it. And that message is problematic on so many levels. It's shaming, it's misinformation. And of course, this 9 days to metabolic health, I have no idea what he's talking about there. It sounds like it's a brand that he's pushing. I don't know though. I want to be careful there.
Sorry, Ryan, just to jump in there as well, as Tim was saying, I mean, these are healthy, fit people that got COVID, even though they're healthy. But then the other thing that we aren't talking about enough is what the consequences of getting COVID are for these people afterwards, right? And so even the young, fit, healthy people, even children who are minimally symptomatic with COVID have long-term effects for weeks and months after they've recovered from their active infection. And so it's not just as simple as whether you get COVID or not. There are lots of long-term effects like chronic fatigue, ongoing shortness of breath, headaches, things that can be debilitating to your function, where the evidence is showing that this is lasting for up to months after the acute illness has resolved. And so that's another thing that needs to come into the conversation as well.
Well, I mean, everybody's got their own anecdotal evidence as well. Sometimes that's productive to a conversation. Sometimes it's not. But I've had my friend Jacqueline Robinson's been on the show before. As a matter of fact, the first month we were up at RyanJesperson.com. You can find the interview. She's a public health nurse in Vancouver, one of the most fit people I know. Dancer, yogi, runner. She was intubated. She was in a coma for 10 days. Like, we just about lost her. And she's one of these people that, like, I've never really been able to understand these people that would, like, they have some free time on their hands, so they go run 20K. I don't quite understand that mindset. But Jackie right now is telling us that a big win for her was when she could walk to the end of the block. And she was pretty proud of herself when she could get to the top of the stairs without stopping. So you don't have to tell me, or you don't have to convince me about some of the concerns, residual impacts, how young people or fit people or healthy people, so to speak. I know it's a subjective phrase, Tim, can be impacted here. And about long COVID, we don't know that much about long COVID yet because we're not that far down the line. But I've heard enough medical professionals telling us it's a problem. Here, you heard the email from Kim that we received. She's, please help. What is the truth? She's asking for help. And I talked about this other video that people have been sharing with me and saying, what do you think about this? Craig wrote in to say, is that the video where the two guys do the press conference from somebody's spare bedroom with a black curtain thrown up? It looks like a junior high video project. Sam, if you take my screen, this is it. I mean, when it comes to recognizing credible sources, this is kind of what I'm talking about. However, at the same time, like, these dudes are sharing their CVs, and one guy's been a certified transplant surgeon. Like, not an idiot. You know what I mean? We talked to former Lieutenant Colonel David Redman on the show. He's Alberta's former chief of emergency management, Alberta Emergency Management back in the day. Some people were outraged that I had him on the show. This is the guy that steered the ship for Alberta Emergency Management 10, 15 years ago. Like, it's a voice that should be stifled or not heard. Tim, you can tell I wrestle with this, right? And I'm curious for your take, too, on when a cardiovascular surgeon or when a former head of emergency management comes out and says these public health guidelines are basically bullshit, it throws a lot of people into a position where they don't know how to figure it out.
It is really tough. And a broader example of that, Ryan, is the debate that circulated around the Great Barrington Declaration. Do you remember that? And this was that idea that we should embrace natural herd immunity and protect only the very vulnerable, right? And in fact, we're doing a study of this right now, Ryan, with colleagues at Simon Fraser University, where we're looking how that was portrayed in the popular press. And there really was a lot of false balance. What you want to do in those situations, Ryan, because there was an individual from Cambridge, from Stanford, and from Harvard, I think. Is that right, Shazma? I can't remember the three big names that were involved. The problem was it was portrayed so often as, on one hand, we have this debate or this position, and on the other hand, we have this other position. And that, of course, isn't it at all. The Great Barrington Declaration was and remains a fringe perspective, right? It's a fringe perspective. And what you want to do is you want to adopt what's called a weight of evidence approach. So what is the weight of evidence on this topic? And you see that in the context of climate change and GMOs and vaccines. That's the more productive approach. So it's not that you can't have a conversation about these kinds of, very fringe perspectives. It's how it's framed and how it's presented to the public. And Ryan, I'm not trying to suck up to you, but you always do a great job. I think you don't pull your punches, and I think that is important. But we don't always see that. Our study hasn't been published yet. We're still going through the data, but we certainly found that there was often this false balance out there around these kinds of topics.
And the problem with these fringe opinions, as Tim mentioned, is that they have this way to evoke emotion in you, right? Similar to Mr. Betts' video. All of us are feeling this. We're a year into this pandemic where we do not want to have these restrictions anymore. I get that. I want to be able to live my life again. I'm sure the two of you do as well. And these types of fringe videos and these misinformation type situations are ones where they're evoking emotion in you. They are speaking to exactly what you're feeling. And you can't blame people for wanting to hear that and wanting to listen to that, which is why it's so dangerous.
Yeah, I totally agree with Shazma. And there's very interesting research to suggest exactly what she just said. A compelling narrative, right? A compelling anecdote will overwhelm all the data points. And there's actually research that tells us that this is how it often plays out. And that's exactly what this video does. And all these rage videos, that's what they all do, right? They present a story that you want to hear that plays to your preconceived notions, to your emotion. And I totally agree with Shazma. I get it. I actually think that what we should take away from the popularity of this video, and again, it's not introducing anything we haven't heard before. It's not trying to start a conversation. It's really just pushing misinformation and generating rage. But what I think we should take away from it is a lesson about the temperature right now outside in the public. People are getting frustrated, and I think that's why we're seeing the two angry doctors. We're seeing this video, and there's Ryan, I see them almost every day, right? I see them almost every day. I think that's what we need to take away from it. We need to listen. We need to engage the public. The other thing I think is really important, Ryan, here is we shouldn't forget. Most Canadians have been awesome. They've been awesome. This is still a relatively small group of Canadians that feel this strongly. Most Canadians have really done what it takes to battle this, and I think we need to celebrate that too.
Dr. Mithani, there was a follow-up video posted yesterday. Killer Betts posted a follow-up video, and I was curious to see what he was going to say. I didn't know if it was going to be like, "Whoa, everybody!" He kind of doubled down. He did say he said there were some discrepancies in the facts I shared. They weren't as current as I would have liked. I'll do better on that next time. But then he hit head on some of his critics, calling him too privileged to comment on mental health. And he also said that he has received an overwhelming number of messages from medical professionals thanking him for his videos, saying they're too afraid to speak out themselves. It's a hell of a thing to assert. And if it's true, it's troubling. I can tell by your facial expression that you're probably going to want to respond to this directly. Where do you think your profession's at on this?
Ryan, I know thousands of healthcare professionals, nurses, doctors, respiratory therapists who have been on the front lines of this pandemic. And I can tell you with certainty that a massive majority of them are in the same camp as I am in trying to raise the alarm bell about how serious this pandemic is. In any situation, you're always going to get outliers, right? Where there are people who are not going to follow the evidence, who are going to subscribe to misinformation and fringe use. But I can tell you what I can see in my emergency department and among my colleagues there and across the country. This is not a popular opinion. In fact, it's a tiny minority, and it's really just not accurate.
Robert says, he says, great point, Tim, that the Vancouver Canucks are proof that health, lifestyle, diet, and exercise alone will not protect you from COVID-19. or it says, 25 or more positive COVID tests as of April 8th. I think that's a great point. Les has an interesting point here as well. It got buried in the chat, but I'll paraphrase. He basically said the biggest difference probably between the times around polio and the time of this pandemic might be social media. Tim, would you agree?
Oh, I absolutely agree. The spread of misinformation, and again, a lot of interesting research over the past year on this exact topic. The spread of misinformation, the spread of this kind of rage, is almost entirely, not completely. We're hearing from other sources, but this is a social media phenomenon, right? And it really is. The other interesting thing here is people are turning to social media because they want to have their views, the echo chamber phenomenon, and that's happening for sure. And just to give you a sense, Ryan, of the degree to which what's being presented in this video is not new. So he's talking about mental health and physical exercise. Those are the big themes, right? I did a search on Google before this interview, and I searched COVID mental health, and I got 1.8 billion hits. Okay, 1.8 billion hits. And I actually had to read it carefully. Is that actually how many hits I got? 1.8 billion. I'm on the Royal Society of Canada's COVID task force. We issued a paper on mental health issues. These aren't new topics. So when mental health experts are saying, when he's saying that health colleagues are supporting him, or health professionals are supporting him, what are they supporting him on? This is really rage, right? It's just they're supporting him in the sense that they are frustrated, and that I get, but it doesn't justify the spreading of misinformation that can do real harm. And Ryan, I think it's really important to highlight this. We haven't talked about this. We know also from research that videos like this and the spread of misinformation does real harm. It does real harm, and there's lots of studies to back that up.
Shazma, can we talk about the mental health angle? There's no doubt. I mean, we had our Real Talk, we call it our Get Real question of the week, presented by Y Station several weeks ago, and people talked about how the pandemic has been impacting them, and there is no doubt. People overwhelmingly, resoundingly told us that their mental health has paid a price, that it's taken a toll. There's no doubt about it, and I don't think anybody would question that. So from you, a trusted medical professional, what's your angle on that? Like, there's no doubt that lockdown and keeping kids away from one another to a certain degree. I mean, we talk about lockdown in Alberta. It's not even close to a lockdown in Alberta. Let's be honest about that. But we do know that there are some implications. People that are typically used to socializing are not getting it. People are feeling a lack of connection. In serious circumstances, people haven't been able to say goodbye. They're mourning the loss of loved ones. They had to see it through a pane of glass, or they watched their loved one on a ventilator, via FaceTime. There's no doubt about that. But I think we can all agree that the solution to that is not just getting rid of public health measures, right? So how do we address mental health in meaningful fashion?
That's a great question, Ryan. And I would say, yes, 100% mental health has been impacted by this pandemic. Any pandemic is going to affect mental health, of course, right? I think what's more harmful to mental health is a few things. One, this constant yo-yoing of restrictions back and forth. We're open, we're closed, we're open, we're closed. I think what really needs to happen is strong measures that will stifle this once and for all. The problem with having restrictions that are not strong enough is that this continues to smolder, and this mental health concern, as well as all the other concerns that are brought up during this pandemic, continues to go on for much longer than they have to. People are also going to have their mental health affected by their family members dying, right? And so the longer this pandemic goes on, the more people that get sick and die, that's also going to have a drastic impact on people's mental health. And so, yes, again, we all want this to be over. This has been a long and grueling year. We're so close, though, and I think that the best path forward is just to nip this in the bud and be done with this, rather than yo-yoing back and forth and prolonging the suffering longer than we have to.
Ryan, if I could comment on the mental health thing too, I think there's a great irony with these kinds of videos, because I don't want to just point to one of them, because you know what else is bad for your mental health? These kind of videos. There's actually really interesting research that talks about how raging and ranting doesn't work. We had this intuitive idea that if I let it all out, right, if I speak my truth, I'm going to feel better and the world's going to feel better. On the contrary, that this is this catharsis idea that really it has been around for a long time, and it sort of took flight with Freud, and it's been with us ever since. John Lennon was really into raging and ranting, and but there's no evidence to support it, and there never has been. So this kind of raging actually makes the situation worse, not better. It throws gasoline on the fire. And the other interesting thing is one of the other mental health things that you want to do is you want to step away from the noise, right? You want to step away from the noise and sort of take this break from the chaotic information environment that is out there. And these kind of videos also don't really invite you to do that. On the contrary, they just add to the chaotic information environment. And again, we've got real evidence to suggest that chaotic information environment adds to stress. And Ryan, interestingly, it also adds to the tendency for people to misinterpret the content they're seeing online, and makes it more likely they're going to share misinformation online. So in other words, this is a worst case scenario. This is exactly what we don't need. We need calm, deliberate, credible information that's going to really inform the public.
I want to note that as we're doing this show live, we're way over the time that I've asked both of you to stay, and we do have a few questions, but I want to be respectful of your schedules. Do either of you have to bolt? It's totally fine if you got to go. We're keeping you way over time. Tim, I can tell you have to go. You have something. I can tell. I've
got a bit more time.
No, I can tell. Okay, well, I'll tell you what. I'll wrap it up because that's so unfair to you.
You saw me looking at my clock.
I did, and I can see you looking off camera. You're looking at a clock, and I'm going, I think he's got to go. I better ask.
I've got 10 minutes.
So, can I keep you both for 10 minutes? That would be amazing. Okay, we'll keep you for 10 minutes. A friend of mine by the name of Jenny, she's watching, and she took a class. We're going to grind her gears on this for years and years because she just took a class at Harvard. She's kind of a big deal. And she says, when I took my class at Harvard, we talked about fake news and how it impacts everything, but especially a crisis. She's a crisis communicator. That's her profession. She says it's interesting to note that not even Harvard has figured out what to do with fake news and how to determine validity for everybody. She says, I was really, to be honest, hoping that they would have had an answer for me there. And I opened today talking about giving people the tools to be able to identify misinformation and those types of things. I want to ask both of you but what you would recommend for people that are trying to sift through. I mean, I've got, for example, April here, and Dr. Mithani. I don't want to put you on the spot here. I don't know if you're that familiar with the assertion. April says, I would love to hear you ask her about the whole vitamin D thing. Some people are treating it like a magic pill to prevent COVID. I mean, that's kind of one specific example. But to both of you, Shazma, you first, giving people the tools to recognize what's valid, credible information and maybe what's not.
So I'll start with April, just to get that out of the way. So there is no evidence. There's actually been a randomized control trial looking at vitamin D and how effective it is at preventing COVID-19. There's no evidence there. Things like hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, those are not drugs where the clinical evidence shows that they're going to help with preventing catching COVID-19 or preventing with the illness once you do contract it. And so I just want to put that one to rest right away. In terms of combating all of the information that's out there, I think it's really important to consume as much as you can and try to look at things from different sides, right? Like if you see something that evokes an emotion, something that you feel like you can identify with, it's equally important to try to find information that looks at the other side as well, because there's, like we've been talking about today, there are, there's platforms for multiple people who are able to get their message out there. When people talk about things and sound like they're smart, sound like they know what they're talking about. And
I think we might have, at least she froze on a decent face, on a decent look. Tim, why don't we get you to take over? We'll get Dr. Mithani back in a minute.
I agree with what she was saying. I think the really important thing is always ask yourself, what kind of evidence is being used to support this? Is it just an anecdote? Is it just a testimonial? What kind of expertise does this individual have? And one of the most important things is to ask, what's the body of evidence on a topic? Really, really important. What is the scientific consensus? And this one's obvious, but I think it's really important to always go to those trusted voices that are aggregating the science in a responsible manner, right? And so, yes, it is the Public Health Agency of Canada. Yes, it is entities like so the CDC and the World Health Organization. That's what we need to do. And unfortunately, as I said, we have this incredibly chaotic information environment. It's becoming more difficult to do that. I'm part of an initiative called Science Up First. I don't know is my video still working?
No, yeah, Sam's just troubleshooting behind the scenes, but we can hear you great. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I'm part of a group called Science Up First. It is a group, includes thousands of volunteers from across Canada, and it really, the goal is to provide credible, trustworthy data on these topics. So if you have any question, I'm hopeful that you can find it on Science Up First. So go to Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. We're going to be on TikTok. Science Up First, and it is credible information on social media. We hope everyone becomes part of it. And all you need to do, Ryan, is share that credible information. And I'm hopeful that we can flood social media with the good stuff.
One of the things I love about having you on the show is you do your own fonts. Like we in TV. It's a lot of work to type out the fonts. You got to get the graphics team to put them all together. You just get a Sharpie and a ripped off piece of paper, and it works great.
Yeah, that's all you need, Ryan.
Yeah. Although we did have one. We did have one fact check on you, Tim, and usually you're the one here doing the fact checking. But Shane is watching. He said that's actually Sir Lewis Hamilton. Tim, it's Sir Lewis Hamilton.
It is Sir Lewis, absolutely.
Hey, I should have asked you. Actually, I said that I would, and then it completely slipped my mind. How do you feel about being introduced, or do you consider yourself to be a myth buster?
I don't mind. People often call me a debunker. I am a science policy person now. I guess I don't mind it. I'm trying to own that phrase debunking. Some people don't like it because it sounds combative and unilateral, and I get that. I think it's about conversations, which is what you do. It's about engagement. I definitely get called mythbuster, debunker, and you know what? That's fine.
Hey, Tim, you stayed way into overtime. We totally appreciate your perspective. And I love this too. Sam and I were chuckling ahead of time about how your CV makes us feel inadequate and underaccomplished. And I didn't even mention the fact that you're on the Royal Society of Canada's COVID Task Force. I mean, I hadn't even put that out there. And plus your new book, Relax, Damn It. And if people want, if they haven't seen your Netflix series, User's Guide to Cheating Death, I highly recommend it. Very well done. It's always great to see you. Thanks for doing the show today.
Thanks for everything, Ryan. Really appreciate this conversation.
You got it. That's Professor Timothy Caulfield, and our thanks sincerely to Dr. Shazma Mithani. We just had a bit of a technical interruption at the end, but we're so great. Or maybe she just, Sam, coming off night shifts in the ER at the Metro Edmonton region's
She probably just fell asleep.
busiest hospital. Well, I think she just sort of had enough. She's probably like, Jesperson, I've said what I had to say. I'm out of here. And, she's got a personal life to get back to, including recharging her batteries so she can be back on the front lines of COVID again in just a little minute, in just a few hours, I should say. I love that Erin Elizabeth Ross is watching the show live today. You remember Erin Ross, the Edmonton artist that was on the show, what was it, maybe 6 weeks ago? If you want to look back in our archive, you can find that interview. She was into one as well. She had COVID, and she was very sick. She was a little bit emotional when she was on the show. She said, I think I'd consider myself very healthy and very fit, and by the way, young too, and I got sick as hell. She says, as you know, I guess I'm unlucky too. Stephen and others of you have pointed out Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson got COVID. So if fitness is... Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson is just like on another level. And I'm not just talking about physique. I'm talking about everything. Sam, do you follow him on Instagram?
I don't. He drifts into my psyche every once in a while, and you're right. He's one of those people I think I just... I don't want to say written off before, but I was just kind of like, yeah, he's not really a legitimate actor and that kind of stuff.
Me too.
And he just keeps coming back with greater and greater stuff.
He is. I am so impressed by him. Like it was like, it's kind of funny if you describe him as like the former Calgary Stampeder, former CFL, sort of a bit player, kind of like did, whatever. And then obviously World Wrestling, WWE superstar, like one of the all-time greats. And then he's gone on to become one of the highest earning actors in the history of Hollywood. And his entrepreneurial side's amazing. His philanthropic side is unbelievable. The videos he posts making little kids' days, kids in hospitals and things like that. I have become like an enormous fan of Dwayne The Rock Johnson. He put out a thing the other day. You have to follow him on Instagram.
I will check it out.
Touching on the fact that he says a lot of it's just a little test balloon, a little trial balloon that he floated. He says a lot of people are asking him about running for president of the United States, and he did not write it off. I should find it. I should read it here live.
Kind of
right
sounds
now.
like we have another Arnold Schwarzenegger situation on our hands here. You know, another person that I think a lot of people kind of wrote off as, I don't want to call a fringe candidate, but you know, he was actually an incredibly effective governor of California, and continues to be this amazing outspoken voice on climate change issues all the time. So it's interesting when people kind of come out of the woodwork like that.
Do you think if Arnie could have run for president that he would have won?
Possibly. You know, it's hard to say because, I mean, at the very least, like he's an outsider, but he actually has a very positive government track record. And, you know, he's a Republican that led the state of California with
he's
a
like
very
a moderate
green agenda.
Republican.
Yeah, like I mean, in a weird way, I feel like he's actually the kind of leader that they probably needed right about now.
Plus,
but,
everybody
yeah.
would be like he would wipe the floor with Vladimir Putin
Yes.
if need be. Like he would wipe the floor with him. Although that's not really what it's about, right? I mean,
Well, we don't
you
wanna
don't
send
you don't
a
have to
strong
be
man
able to
after a
you
strong
don't have
man.
to you don't have to be able to bench press 400 pounds
Yeah.
to send drones into villages and kill a bunch of civilians. American presidents have been able to do that, regardless of whether or not they've been able to bench a car. But yeah, that would be interesting to know. I don't know. So maybe a political, you know, on the Democratic side, and I don't even know what The Rock's politics are. I shouldn't
Yeah.
assume he's a Democrat. I don't know, but it could get a little crowded if Oprah Winfrey's serious about it, and if I mean, we're just going to all celebrities now. We're going to get to your comments on what you just heard here. Plus, I promised I want to get to some of your emails. We've got a whole bunch of really good ones, including one from Sonia, who wrote in about a statement that she says most people don't realize it's actually quite offensive to a certain group of people. She said, but I've heard it on Real Talk a couple of times, Ryan. I was hoping you could put it out there. We're going to get into that one. It was actually, I did a little bit of learning. I hope that this happens every day for every single one of you. I did a little bit of learning. I read Sonia's email. I went, really? I looked it up and I went, appreciate it. These conversations are made possible because teams like St. Albert and Sherwood Dodge support this show, and they've joined us on our journey to make sure that we continue to grow. I'm so excited to tell you that the team at St. Albert and Sherwood Dodge right now has those 2021 Jeep Cherokee Sports at like $6,000 knocked right off. $34,990 right now. These are the ones with the heated leather seats and the touchscreen Bluetooth dash and all of the luxury elements that you might expect, you might find in the higher ups like the Grand Cherokee or that Grand Wagoneer that's coming back. The Cherokee 4x4 Sport, one of the most popular Jeeps in the brand's history, and you won't find a better selection than you will at St. Albert and Sherwood Dodge. Also wanted to remind you that the team at Clean Air Club wants you to breathe easy and save money. Yesterday, we showed you a couple of photos from Real Talkers. They post them to the hashtag RealTalkRJ, showing us their new furnace filters wrapped up and personalized, delivered to their front door. Plus, they're paying less than they would in the store. There you have it. This one from Angela. Look at that. It even says Angela on the sticker. I'm impressed by the little things. CleanAirClub.ca is where you can sign up for that. Also wanted to remind you that Friesen Brothers' new location, its 15th in Alberta, is worth the trip. We get messages from Real Talkers. One of you drove 90 minutes the other day to go check out their new Edmonton location just off Rabbit Hill Road, and you went, whoa! I went, well, yeah. I spent this weekend crushing 3, Sam, count them, 3 of their Alberta sourdough cinnamon buns. They come with my personal recommendation and pair very nicely with some freshly squeezed orange juice. You'll find that at Friesen Brothers, Alberta grown and Alberta owned. Are you a cinnamon bun guy?
I am like not only a cinnamon bun guy, but like for several gifts that I've been given in the last little while, people have given me really nice coffee. So I want a pack of those cinnamon buns to go with my tastament array of some nice coffees.
Yeah. There's nothing quite like a great coffee and a cinnamon bun. Warmed, you got to find it's a very fine line when warming a cinnamon bun, because you want the bun to be warmed, not just on the outside either, all the way through. You want it to be equitably warmed, but you don't want the icing to melt on top. And if you can master that balance, then you truly deserve recognition. You can send in your perfectly heated cinnamon bun photos from Friesen Brothers to Real Talk RJ, and I guarantee that we'll feature them here on the show. I got this email from Corbin a while ago, and this factors in. I mean, this is a perfect example of the types of conversations we're having today. When is a perspective worth talking about? When should an argument have the oxygen squeezed out of it? When should something be amplified? Who deserves a platform? These are the types of questions we're looking to you to answer in our live chat right now on our hashtag RealTalkRJ, and of course to talk at RyanJesperson.com. Corbin says, big fan of the show. He says, I tune in daily. Corbin, you beauty. He says, I tune in daily to get a good dose of both sides of stories and issues of the day. He said, Ryan, you often do this in a way that I believe can be uncomfortable to some, but respectable at the same time. In recent episodes, you've really taken issue with the recent draft curriculum. And all of your guests to date seem to be speaking in opposition to the curriculum. I would be super curious to know what the other side says about the curriculum, assuming there's another side. He says, please and thanks. I'm a parent of 2 kids that would both be affected and effected. He does it with an A and an E. He says grade 1 and grade 3 currently. I have no firm position on the curriculum, and I believe I should know what the other side has to say so I can truly form a position. That from Corbin. Now, let me say big picture, Sam, what I love about Corbin's message is that he acknowledges that there's more than one side to the story. He wants to hear various perspectives. That's why he tunes into Real Talk. This is a guy that wants to educate himself from different perspectives so he can make an informed decision. I think that's so important. Now, I think you have to find the balance, right? You have to find the balance of what perspectives should be written off completely, what's absolutely preposterous and ridiculous, who has a point, a valid point worth considering, and let's question everything. I mean, I think that question everything is a mantra that works for a lot of people. We should not just lap up information and accept it. But when trusted professionals, credentialed people, when experts have data-based, evidence-based positions, I think that's what needs to trump, some of the other opinions, the loud sort of like rage fuel that we see out there. I mean, that's where we need to find the line.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've been sort of wrestling with a little bit here is the idea that it's like anybody can have an opinion, and we do sort of live in a world right now where opinions can be elevated. And I also think that some of these opinions, I know this email was about curriculum, but it's just about debunking misinformation in general. Some people bring out opinions that I think are designed to give you the answers you want. That's a lot of what came out in these videos that we've been seeing, is that there's some real frustration. And if we ask experts like Dr. Mithani and Dr. Caulfield that we just had on, they will show us where all the holes in those arguments are, and they will show us, they'll give us like an expert sort of citation, but they're also not giving you the answers that you want to hear. It's very, very, very attractive to hear from people that are giving you the answers that you want to hear, because it feels like a change. It feels like something different. It feels like a different direction you could go in.
Yeah, on the live chat, Donna says that email from Corbin, tell Corbin he needs to talk to teachers. That's who he should be talking to. Tracy puts something positive out there, says, I like the literacy in the new curriculum using the science of reading. I'm super happy with that. Alyssa's watching, says, I don't know if there is another side to the curriculum. I mean, maybe aside from the premiers, Alyssa, he says that they're getting a ton of positive feedback on it. You will have, people are saying, I thought that the Dr. Jordan Peterson endorsement was a really weird one. I think he's a people are going to say, one guy reached out to me and said, why are you taking issue with a globally famous tenured professor supporting the curriculum? And I thought, globally famous and tenured has absolutely nothing to do with whether or not somebody's endorsement of K-6 curriculum is appropriate.
No.
Like tenured? Okay. So now all of a sudden is everybody that's tenured? Okay, well, I can find some profs that are tenured that are absolutely nuts.
Well, and again, it's just like the assumption is by the time somebody reaches tenure, they've been vetted by the system. The system, the university academic system, has internally decided by the time they get to that they're an expert, and that's what people assume.
But I can find somebody that's a tenured university professor that has no business endorsing K-6 curriculum.
Well, and
what does Dr. Jordan Peterson know about K-6 curriculum? Plus,
absolutely nothing.
Dr. Jordan Peterson is a very, this is the guy there's no denying, there's no questioning This is another classic example, by the way. People say, would you have Dr. Jordan Peterson on your show? Hell yeah, I would have Dr. Jordan Peterson on my show. Like, would I open up and say, Doctor, here's the microphone for 45 minutes, and we'll eagerly write down everything you have to say and burn it into our brains and just accept it as God speak? No. But I'd certainly have a conversation with him. The guy's got an enormous fan base. But what was his first 15 minutes? I mean, what put him on the map? It was refusing to recognize preferred pronouns of some of the students in his classes at the University of Toronto. That was like the starting point. I mean, people would say, well, he's from like Fairview, Alberta, and what are you saying? He has a long history and a story, and that's not the starting point. You get what I'm saying. People learned his name. His name became part of public discourse because of that. And then he went on to write a bunch of books and do a bunch of lecture series, and now he's got a podcast. So there's one example. Jordan Peterson endorsing the curriculum. Felt like a weird one. I saw that the United Conservative Government saying, well, Sheldon Kennedy, the sexual abuse survivor, NHL pro, and an absolute beauty of a guy. I love Sheldon Kennedy. Well, he endorses the curriculum. And some people are saying, well, hang on a second. Like, Sheldon Kennedy has spoken to the consent part of it, or some of the specific angles of what he thinks that, like, this one angle in this one class in this one grade, that's a good initiative. But then the government will say, well, Sheldon Kennedy endorses the curriculum. And I find that some people are probably actually being put in pretty tough positions considering how divisive this has been. Michelle says, I have yet to hear a teacher speak in favor of this curriculum, and I am a teacher, so I'm in touch with a whole bunch of them. That from Michelle. Kim says, I'm not sure there is another side. I've not seen a non-politician chime in on this. And that's the thing, too. Like, You've got to look at where the support comes from. If the support's coming from caucus or from the party or from the press secretaries for the MLAs or the ministers, like, is that really resounding support, or is that a team cheering itself on? I think it's safe to say that across the board, it would be like trying to find, and let me be careful what I say here because I don't want to write off any perspective automatically, but it would be like trying, saying, for example, where's the other side on coal mining, on open pit coal mining in the Eastern Slopes, in the Rocky Mountains, Ryan? Where's the other side? Now, we have had Robin Campbell on the show, president of the Coal Association of Canada, former environment minister for the province of Alberta. It was his statement on this show that selenium is just salt that really kind of kickstarted about a week's worth of shows with a number of expert voices and a really great discussion as far as I'm concerned here on Real Talk. So I guess that is kind of the other side of the argument. And even just yesterday, talking to our coal roundtable, I said I don't want to ignore the fact that jobs could be created here, that there could be some economic activity at a time where people are literally begging for it in many communities. But is there another side? You talk about pollution or the permanent alteration to the landscape. Where's the other side? Like, why aren't you bringing voices that think that maybe our mountains could be shaped? Like, maybe we should have our own Mount Rushmore in the Eastern Slopes. We could do the Mount Rushmore of Alberta politicians. And then we could do a series of shows, Sam, on which 4 former premiers should be on the Mount Rushmore. We'd have to come up with a made in Alberta name for it, for the Mount, what it would be, not Rushmore, but our equivalent. I mean, maybe that's a perspective. I mean, I'm being facetious and idiotic, but maybe we need to, where's the other side of that story? The story with coal is that there really isn't another side. You've got people that voted NDP, Alberta Party, Alberta Liberals. You got people that voted United Conservatives that back in the day voted for the Wild Rose, or a whole bunch of other angles and options on what characterizes people. People living in the city, people living in the suburbs, farmers, ranchers, other landowners. I mean, everybody, environmental interest groups, people are chiming in across the board and saying, this is totally unacceptable. Like, how many emails have we read on this show from people saying, I voted United Conservative because of the coal story. I will not be voting United Conservative again. That's the story. I mean, that's one significant angle on that story. Hawes says most opinions are based in morality. If the base morality is different, it'll be tough to see an opinion as valid. Erica says, I'll listen to anything and everything. I trust my BS detector, and I trust my ability to filter out the nonsense. Shalane says, self-serving opinions are abundantly available. I want expert opinions. Michelle says the UCP will be emboldened by any positive feedback. They'll try to slap some lipstick on that pig and march it back out. The entire curriculum needs to go. That from Michelle. Keep the comments coming. Let me remind you how grateful we are to be partnering with the team at Eden Landscaping. This is the time of year where they're ready to go. Shovels in the ground. They're building what they've been helping people design when it comes to transforming their outdoor space. And it's not too late for you to make it happen this summer. Go check them out online at landscapeedmonton.ca. I always talk about the swim spa. That's where my mind is at. I just think of if I
You really want a swim
I
spa,
really
don't
want a
you?
swim spa.
Yeah.
I really do. But the swim spas are the ones that look like a lot of work with the big jets that blow at you and you swim against the current. I'm talking more about the one you just sort of like hang in the corner and let the jet just sort of like massage your back.
That's a hot tub.
Yeah, well, no, but like it's bigger than a hot tub. You can stand in it, right? Swimming against a big blower jet sounds like a lot of work to me. Whether it's a hot tub, a swim spa, a patio deck, maybe an extension to what you already have, a pergola, a gazebo, or anything else, the team at Eden Landscaping can design it for you like they've been doing for their satisfied customers for more than 2 decades. Again, landscapeedmonton.ca. Also wanted to remind you that we're very proud to be partnering with the team at Local Waste. They love to talk trash. That's why they sponsor Trash Talk right here on this show every single Friday. Send your rants, your gripes, your fueled rages to talk at ryanjesperson.com. And as we wrap up the broadcast week, every week on Friday, we go out with Trash Talk. Make sure you tune in live. You might hear yours. And of course, Sam does a great job pushing about a separate podcast and separate YouTube links so you can share those around as well. Local Waste, for more than 25 years, has been partnering with locally owned businesses and then some of the real big internationals as well. No job too big, no job too small. They're helping people find their waste management solutions, garbage and recycling, and they'd love to compete for your business. Check them out today at localwaste.ca. Do you remember Sonia's email? I'm not going to give you any hints. Do you remember? We got an email from Sonia and she to talk at ryanjesperson.com. She wrote in the subject line.
Just based on the name, probably not. Subject line, maybe.
Pardon my French?
Oh, this email.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me read it, and then let's get into this. She says, I want to thank you and Sam, the great conversations that you guys make happen on Real Talk. She says this is not a big issue, says Sonia, but it is something that I've heard twice in the last 2 days and at other times in the past, most especially, she says, since I moved to Alberta. Sonia says, the other day in your conversation about Yom HaShoah, what a powerful roundtable that was on Holocaust Remembrance Day. She says, you were quoting an anonymous doctor, and you read the email, and at one point he invoked, pardon my French. And then he followed this with profanity, with swearing in English. Sonia says, I'm a native French speaker, and I've always been bothered when I hear that phrase. I don't think people who use that expression realize that it can actually be quite offensive to French speakers. She says, I know it is to me. Why do some people who swear in their language pretend like they are using someone else's? It's condescending. I'm just hoping that when you feel it is appropriate and timely, you will point it out and help people think about what they say. Merci. That from Sonia. And so I went online, I did what I'm just doing right now, and I typed, is pardon my French offensive? Because I went, really? But then I also kind of got this gut instinct when I read the email. I went, yeah, I guess I can kind of see why, because like, why do we even say it? And it's pretty interesting. And you can look it up, and I mean, there's a whole bunch of different interpretations on it, but basically the idea being that, it's used after cursing. I'm reading from sporkle.com as a feeble attempt to disguise it as being a French word. It's often used to excuse yourself when there's somebody who might visibly be offended by profanity. It can also be used right before you curse as a warning to those who are part of the conversation. That from Sonia. I thought that was interesting. It's just sometimes our emails are about politics or items in the news or some of the issues that are really getting under people's skin. And other times it's just something to make us think. And I learned something from Sonia, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, emails like this, they stand out to me. They're not the usual let's talk more about curriculum or coal, which we love. We get tons of those emails, and those are very, very important. But little tidbits on how we can improve our show, I always read those emails. They're great.
No kidding. You mind teeing up the video from City News, the one that was shot outside Grace Life Church? You guys saw this obviously over the weekend. This was a story that I know many of you wanted to have a more extensive conversation about yesterday. We just had such a remarkable conversation with the White family yesterday. with Roberta White, who, under unimaginably tragic circumstances, lost her husband Rob on April 6th when he did successfully, when he did rescue a dog that was at risk of drowning on the North Saskatchewan River. And Rob, unfortunately, despite the best efforts of volunteers on scene, civilians, and rescue crews with Edmonton Fire Rescue, the STARS chopper was up in the air, the Edmonton Police chopper was up in the air. They were unable to save him. And Roberta, her friends call her Bobby, and her sons Strider and Alliance joined us yesterday, along with Chris Barrett, who's was Rob's best friend. I'm going to say who is Rob's best friend. They joined us, and the conversation was just so, I don't know what I expected from that conversation. I was a little bit nervous to talk to them because sometimes when you say I don't have the words, I didn't have the words. Who possibly could? And they almost ended up, I think, even if you watched it yesterday, and if you didn't watch or listen yesterday, you have to. They ended up, I think, encouraging us more than we encouraged them. It was one of the most powerful conversations I've ever had with somebody, and I can't even imagine where they're at right now. I can't even wrap my mind around it. The point of all of this is that it just felt right after that conversation yesterday to focus on the positives, to wrap the show, and to text or call one or more people that we loved and tell them how we felt. And we'll reserve the right to do that on this show if the time feels right. I didn't want to slip back into talking politics and divisive COVID stories and churches with fences around them. It felt like a time for a moment of reflection, and I'm so grateful to the White family that joined us, especially Roberta, Alliance, and Strider. We can't even imagine your grief. And just a reminder, by the way, if you were moved by that conversation or by this story, there's a couple of things that you could do to offer your support, including supporting the GoFundMe account that's been established in Rob's honor to help his family navigate through this very difficult next number of months and of course, years. And you can find that. I linked to it on my Twitter at Ryan Jesperson. But we left some emails on the table, and this is a pretty high-profile story on Sunday when they call themselves Patriots, capital P Patriots, arrived by truck convoy and otherwise from communities in and around Alberta and maybe further than that. I mean, Maxime Bernier's flying in, the federal politician. Derek Sloan's flying in. Everybody's doing what they can to sort of get their piece of the pie here when it comes to the publicity and the fundraising opportunities. There's right-wing media outlets that are out there making the most of it. I mean, this is what we're talking about. They're there, I mean, under police supervision and who knows what the police, I mean, I'd be curious to hear from law enforcement officers here. In my opinion, they're probably doing everything they can to stop this thing from escalating. But as you'll see in the video here, they're trying to tear these fences down, and ultimately they're succeeding. These are fences that were put up, finally, you might say, by Alberta Health Services after this pastor, James Coates, and his congregation continued to gather week after week at full capacity. Ultimately, the pastor is spending about a month in jail because he told Alberta Health Services, he told RCMP that he was not going to adhere, he was not going to comply with the public health order. He was not going to limit his congregation to 15% of fire code capacity, so they left them in prison. And I mean, he's the one with the last laugh at this point, right? I mean, no meaningful charges laid. Charges were dropped, as a matter of fact. None of his congregants are facing charges. They're doing whatever the hell they want. They're gathering en masse. They're obviously seeing a ton of support right now. I can't even imagine how much money they're raising through all of this. I mean, he's got the last laugh. What was really interesting is that this group is now kind of spilling over, not just at the church west of Edmonton and not just onto Enoch land, Indigenous Reserve. Chief Billy Morin reportedly, this per Alberta's Premier Jason Kenney, had his own car vandalized, has said that members of his community, of the community out there on the Enoch First Nation, have faced racist remarks from these people. The land borders their land, so this is something that's very relevant to them. You got a whole bunch of other people that, by the way, aren't masked, and I'm pretty sure as hell aren't getting the vaccine, that are also there right there on their knocking on their front doorstep. You can imagine how that would make them feel. And this video submitted by a Real Talker yesterday. Wanted to remain anonymous. She said, I don't really care about the video credit, but shot this out of her office window yesterday in downtown Edmonton, and you can see the protests are continuing. This is really nothing new. We've seen these in Canadian cities through this pandemic, and mostly I would say over the past few months as this sort of COVID exhaustion has set in. But another demonstration, this one in downtown Edmonton, as you see, I don't know what that is, maybe 150 people or something like that, 100 people marching through the streets with all kinds of signs. Some of them I can't even say what the signs say, even on Real Talk, Sam, which is saying if I can't even say what the signs say on Real Talk, that's saying something. But they're calling for an end to the lockdown measures. And of course, the language is supercharged on this. The language absolutely supercharged. Churches, houses of worship with triple layer fencing around them, pastors locked up in jail. This is your Canada. This is your Alberta, where we jail pastors and lock up houses of worship. Jonas has been watching our coverage and wrote in, not my brother Jonas, by the way, but I appreciate this from Jonas, who says, Ryan and crew, I just answered your question of the week, which I really appreciate. You can find that at ryanjesperson.com. We're asking you this week how you feel about this situation at Grace Life Church and what you make of recent developments and how you think it should have been or should be handled and what you think it says about the community. Jonas says, I felt surprisingly compelled when you asked the question, what would Jesus do? WWJD. What would Jesus do about the Grace Life Church situation? Jonas said, I wanted to write in. I actually wanted to send you an email directly. He said, Jesus, as his life and teachings are portrayed in the gospel writings, is more concerned with human welfare than following rules. He was known for breaking rigid Sabbath observance laws in his time. Therefore, I do not think he would be concerned about whether, where, or how a church physically gathers. Jesus was also thought to have said, wherever two or more are gathered, I am present with them. Jonas says, and so I think physically distanced services are quite reasonable from that standpoint. Jesus was also known to have mocked people who made a show of their religious observance and counseled modesty when it comes to matters of faith. Jonas says, I grew up in a progressive church and I've completed biblical and theological studies at Canadian Mennonite University. I've written extensively about politics and theology. My personal beliefs have shifted towards agnosticism, particularly because of the damage that churches like Grace Life, who insist on a rigid and distorted reading of biblical text, are doing in our society. Jonas says, I still recognize a kind of truth in Christianity, and I greatly appreciate how it has shaped me as a person. But I see truth in many other places, and I see mistruths in Christian churches like Grace Life. The Christianity at that church and others has shockingly little to do with what I read to be the true message of Jesus in its historical and social context. Like you've said on your show before, if I had to apply a contemporary ideological label to Jesus' teachings, it would be socialism, plain and simple. Jonas says, I could go on longer, but I'll limit myself for your sake. Thanks for your good work starting real conversations. That from Jonas out of Southern Alberta. I really appreciate that. And I think it's an important comment to make. One of the things that I'd be concerned about if I was a congregant at Grace Life Church and I cared even the tiniest bit about this would be, this is a loaded phrase I'm going to use, but I'll cut to the chase, guilt by association. You look at a lot of the people and a lot of the groups that are showing up now to support this church, and I'm not sure. I mean, if the church cares, they may not care at all. They may love this. As a matter of fact, they may welcome it. They may embrace it. But a lot of the people and a lot of the groups that are showing up to support this church come with a lot of baggage and huge public perception issues. And in some cases, people that have been found in the Canadian courts to have violated libel and slander laws, people whose public commentary has been very problematic, has been Islamophobic, has been homophobic, and in my opinion, the Grace Life Church congregation is finding themselves in a really tough position, Sam, by accepting essentially the endorsement and the support of some of these types of groups.
Yeah. Oh man, there's a lot to unpack here. I want to talk a little bit about the rally at the legislature yesterday, because for me, it was I'm going to bring this back to Grace Life, I promise. It was a bit of an insight into in their world a little bit. So, scrolling through Twitter yesterday, I saw some people mentioning the rally, and then somebody posted a link to a live stream, and the live stream was a guy who is. He took pains to say he doesn't represent Grace Life Church, but he clearly is more than just a congregant. And he talks about how he's from Grace Life when he interviews everybody, including Maxime Bernier. Went up to Maxime Bernier afterwards, gave him a pat on the back and almost like a hug. And Bernier apologized. He couldn't be at church last weekend with them. And the guy said, well, that's okay. We held it underground. Don't worry. We're meeting at a secret location. Thank you to everyone that's been distracting them and keeping them away from us. And I found this whole interview fascinating, or this whole guy running around the legislature fascinating, because over and over and over again, he would go up to other people and he made a lot of point to say he's from Grace Life Church, and people would always laugh it off and be like, oh yeah, it's the church in the cage, or it's the church in jail, and they just keep laughing about it. And then he met one guy on the interview who actually tore down the fence and started chatting with the guy, and the guy's just like, yeah, I'm just a supporter of the church, and I came in from nowhere, because this guy connected the interview, keep going on and on, saying, it's like, we, the people from Grace Life, did not endorse this being torn down. Are you Antifa? Is essentially what he was charging this guy with. So it's very interesting seeing inside of the world of people in this situation and how they see the world, and how they're doing these protests to try and sort of understand and advance this narrative.
Yeah, well, I mean, the demonstrations are problematic for a number of reasons. Trevor M. says, as I tweeted the other day, this entire fiasco lies squarely on the pastor. Les says this is a monster that's out of control. Terry says, look at all the kids. The kids that are there watching that anger, being exposed to this, and then the next day being sent to school. I've seen some sort of dismissive and cynical comments from people, I don't blame them, but that have said, hopefully all these kids are being homeschooled. Lou says, look at them acting like they're somehow tearing down the Berlin Wall. Chad says, yeah, a whole bunch of patriots with their Canadian flags flying upside down, Western independence flags, American flags. Rod Maldaner, who's been doing amazing work here. Rob's a longtime video journalist. We call him Shooters, big camera guy. And Rod's been on the front lines of a lot of this coverage, says, and yet the church, tried to separate themselves from this group on Sunday. He says, well, this is their fit. They have to own all of this. Without them breaking the rules, there's no protest on Sunday. Own it, Grace Life. I agree with Rob, 100%. 100%. Donna, meantime, wants to swerve off onto a different conversation, which is right in my wheelhouse, Donna. I love it. She says, what's your take, for those listening outside Alberta, Nathan Cooper, the Speaker of the House, and we're not going to get into the weeds on what that implies, but basically a speaker who's elected and chosen by secret ballot by their peers, both in opposition and in government, takes on a position of being neutral and of essentially being apolitical. I mean, their job is to essentially oversee the goings-on of the House. And Nathan Cooper was one of the 17 MLAs. He's a rural MLA out of Three Hills, right? What is it? Three Hills, Old Didsbury, or something like that off the top of my head. I apologize if I'm wrong. But Central Alberta will say he signed this letter calling for the end to lockdown measures. And Donna says, what's your take, Ryan, on Speaker Nathan Cooper signing with the other MLAs on ending the lockdown? Want to let you know, we did reach out to Speaker Cooper to ask him to come on the show. He did respond, which I appreciated. He said, I'm going to let my signing the letter speak for itself. He said, I was representing my constituents. I was not signing as the Speaker. Which is a little rose-colored glasses for me on the interpretation. You are the Speaker, so whatever you sign, you are signing as the Speaker. But I will say this: he walked it back yesterday. He released a video saying that in hindsight, he regrets signing his name to something that has obviously become so political. Donna, to answer your question, what's my take on it? I actually agree with Jason Kenney. I think that Nathan Cooper needs to resign as Speaker. I think that's what needs to happen. So, and I mean, there are other avenues. I was hearing from some politicos that were kind of getting into what would have to happen, and there'd have to be a non-confidence motion, essentially. I don't even know if they call it that, but it would have to be supported by the NDP and the United Conservatives, and it's probably unlikely to happen. My thought, to cut to the chase, is that Speaker Nathan Cooper needs to resign as Speaker. He can stay on as MLA all he likes, but I think he's compromised the office. Also wanted to get to this email from Michelle before we get into a conversation. We're going to talk about Bitcoin. It's at a record high right now, and there's also, believe some people, a real threat to the future of Bitcoin, and that is the digital currency that China is rolling out. Adam O'Brien, the founder and CEO of Bitcoin Well, is going to join us in a few minutes. But I love this from Michelle, who heard our interview yesterday with Kelly Keane. the personal finance educator. Kelly's written, I think, 10 books, and she was on the show giving us some advice about these 53% of Canadians. This MNP survey found that 53% of Canadians say that they're within $200 or less from insolvency at any given time. That at any given time, if they experienced an interruption to their income, they'd be in a position where they could not meet all of their monthly obligations. And so we brought Kelly on for some troubleshooting tips on if you find yourself in a position where everything's that tight, where your head's just above water, what are some of the things we can keep in mind? What are some tips? What are some, what's the pro tip, essentially? Michelle says, I wanted to write in about Kelly. Well, I think she was great. I think you guys, both of you, totally missed the mark in regards to the story that you were addressing. And that is that 53% of Canadians are $200 away from insolvency. Michelle says, I'm sorry, but that statistic is dire. And it shows that there's a fundamental flaw with our whole system. What that 53% doesn't need is financial advice on how to cut the cable or watch their spending on avocado toast. Bringing on a financial expert to address this is like taking a garden hose to a burning apartment tower. She says, I've also heard you mention a few times, Ryan, that you don't believe we should tax the wealthy. I'll get back to that. That income redistribution isn't necessary. But over the last 30 to 40 years, that's exactly what's been happening. She says the richer are paying less in tax than ever before. The middle class is being squeezed and everything's getting more expensive. Service fees, insurance, groceries, everything costs more. The wealthy are doing better than ever. The poor are suffering. The middle class is shrinking, and the pandemic has exaggerated that. The income gap between the top and the rest of the world is one of the biggest problems we face right now. If something else were to happen on top of this pandemic, Canada would collapse if 53% of its citizens suddenly hit the ditch. It's a catastrophe in the making. Michelle says, I'd love to see you dig deeper into this. Instead of focusing on micro issues like watching one's spending for 1 month a year to find trends, look at the big picture of how our system is deeply flawed and contributing to how we got here. And keep up the great work, she says. That from Michelle. These are some of my favorite kind of emails. I love this. It also provides insight into how some people may perceive some of the things that I've said, where she says, it kind of jumped out at me. I went, what? When she says, I've heard you mention a few times you don't believe we should tax the wealthy. And I kind of went, I don't know about that. But I have said some things that I know that some people have taken issue with. For example, when I've supported, as I have for years, I remember the first time that I was asked this question. It was on the radio. It was live on a phone call. It was while Jim Prentice was Premier of Alberta, which means it was early 2015. So this is like 6 years ago. And someone said, what would you do if you were Premier? And I said, flat tax and sales tax. So I've been saying that for about 6 years on the record, and probably longer off the record. And some people have reached out and said, a sales tax punishes the poor more than anybody else, and a flat tax allows the wealthy to get off the hook, and they don't pay their fair share. And I think that there's a great argument to be had around that, and I'm not afraid of having those arguments. I love that. As a matter of fact, what I'd really love to do is we continue what we've been doing for a long time, which is bring on experts, and I'll just moderate the conversation. And sometimes guests will say, that's a really good point, Ryan. And sometimes guests will very diplomatically say, I think you're a little off on that one, Ryan. And then we can all learn from a real expert, not from me, right? I've never put a provincial or federal budget together. Quite frankly, I have no idea what I'm talking about. I have strong opinions, but I love when viewers or listeners like Michelle reach out and say, yeah, I'm not so sure about that. And I'd like to dig deeper into that. And I think we should focus more on that. And I think it's a great idea. And we are. We have some great interviews coming up. We had a guest that was going to join us today. I'm not going to say who it is. A nationally recognized voice on real estate, property values, trends, banking. He's going to be a great guest. He's sick. He's like, I can barely talk. He's like, my throat's screwed. I said, hey, get well, pal. We'll get you on the show when we can. That's one example. That's one example of the conversations we'll have around this. And let me also point out that one of the things that Michelle does is it reminds us what's resonating with people and what the priorities of the audience are. And this is so important to us. We want this show to be a show that you go to every single day because you're trying to make sense of a story and you want to be able to trust the platform. You know that if we're going to bring somebody on here, that they come from a position of credibility and they might help you better sort out the issue that seems a little obfuscated, the one that seems a little cloudy, and I'm right there with you. So, Michelle, the way that you challenge this show, the way you hold our feet to the fire, the way that you make positive suggestions, totally appreciated. And thank you for that. And please do keep the emails coming to talk@ryanjesperson.com. Adam O'Brien's coming up in just a quick second. Wanted to remind you that today's a great day to treat yourself at the Dairy Queens of Northwest Edmonton or Sherwood Park. You don't have to wait for the weekend to go grab a dipped cone or a sundae. Plus, it's a great time to celebrate. I don't know what it's like in your neck of the woods, but if you're where we are right now, the sun is shining, the temperature is climbing. There is reason for optimism, and as I'm realizing I'm saying this, I'm calling on another snowstorm. Well, either way, Dairy Queens of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park are wide open through their drive-thrus for you, plus using your favorite delivery app. Make sure you let them know that you're a real talker. They love hearing from you guys. The team at Park Power powers our hashtag at Real Talk RJ. They're in the internet, electricity, and natural gas game. I know that a whole bunch of you are going to parkpower.ca and saving $70 on your first bill by using the promo code 2021-Real Talk. I also know that a bunch of you think it's a great idea, but you're not getting off your butts and doing it. Why not? Parkpower.ca. Right now, today, it's a quick and easy changeover. If you're in the province of Alberta, you're entitled to pay whoever you want for your power. You're entitled to go and shop the market for natural gas, right? Especially for internet. So why not see what the team at Park Power can do for you at parkpower.ca. Also, a big shout out to the team at Kubi Energy, Tesla certified journeyman electrician and electrical apprentices as their installers in BC and Alberta offices, headquartered out of Edmonton, also in Kamloops. They do everything from the small, like the summer vacation property installs, all the way up to big new home builds, even industrial complexes. They did the Edmonton Convention Center. The whole outside of it is this awesome solar installation. That was Jake and his team at Kubi Renewable Energy. You can find them online at kubienergy.ca. Well, if you're following Bitcoin and if crypto is on your radar, I don't have to tell you that right now Bitcoin is booming. It's kind of been the story of the past number of months, and I know a lot of people are trying to figure out, okay, is this for real now? Because if it is, and if the experts, like the ones at Bloomberg that are saying that Bitcoin is going to be almost double where it's at right now within a year, I got to get in on this. And then you're following another story about China's digital currency and how it could bury Bitcoin, and you're going, okay, well, which is right? Adam O'Brien is the founder and CEO of Bitcoin Well, the presenting sponsor of this program, and it's always a real pleasure to connect with you, my man. Welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, so it's kind of funny when we talk about the price of Bitcoin. I always have to hit refresh right before okay, well, here, it just went up $1,100 since when I opened the page at the beginning of the show, and now it's here trading as we speak right now at this minute. By the time someone listens to the podcast, it'll probably be different, but just a hair under 80 grand, 80 grand Canadian for Bitcoin. People were thrilled when it was at 45 grand, and then what was it a year ago? It was at 3,500. So how are you you're a real even keel guy. So how are you processing what you're seeing right now?
It's funny, even keel is not something that most people would use to describe me. I usually get described as frantic and a little bit off the edge.
you are like the marriage of excitability and even keel. And what I mean by, let me say this, because you're very enthusiastic, you're hilarious, you're a big personality, and I love being in a room with you. But you're also like, I've talked to you personally when Bitcoin has plummeted, and I've talked to you when it's surged, and the smile is on your face in both circumstances. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I do have a pretty big picture view for Bitcoin. Bitcoin to me is not something that you buy and then sell in a month or in a year even. Bitcoin is a savings plan to me. I think I've said that on your show before, Ryan. It's a savings plan and not an investment. But certainly, I mean, $80,000 Bitcoin is a lot better than $8,000 Bitcoin. And, you know, in 2013, 14, 15, even 2016, an $8,000 Bitcoin was just, you know, out of left field. It was never going to happen. I remember conversations I had with a buddy. We were sitting at Credo downtown. Bitcoin was $256 US. I'll never forget it. And him and I sat there and we were like, maybe this is all Bitcoin is. Clearly not. Clearly, it was both of our juniorness to Bitcoin. But here we are, further understanding the economics behind it and further understanding why Bitcoin is the way it is. And frankly, I think $80,000 Canadian is cheap for a Bitcoin.
Yeah, I mean that's what a lot of the experts are talking about, and right now, Adam, what I think is maybe compelling. We've been spending all show today talking about credibility and talking about how to determine what's a perspective worth considering and what might not be, and for a lot of people that has everything to do with who is saying something. And they may say, well, my buddy's been bold on Bitcoin since he bought a whole bunch of it for $400 10 years ago. But now that Forbes is writing about it and Bloomberg's talking about it, and right now these are like the definitive voices. We might call them the legacy voices of financial commentary, and they're starting to talk about it. That, in my mind, with regards to public opinion, is a bit of a game changer.
Yeah, the funny thing about credibility too, especially in this space, is that credibility is another term for lack of liability. And Forbes has been infamously, trying to trash Bitcoin. Warren Buffett, the same thing. There's a great website that popped up, and I'll send it to you later, Ryan, so you can look at it. It's like bitcoinisdead.lol or some funny website URL like that. And it showcases all of what these credible sources have been saying about Bitcoin over time. Credibility from my standpoint is absolutely who and the accomplishments behind who, but next to that, it's what. And your buddy owning a bunch of Bitcoin at $400 and being bullish on it, that's just obvious. Just like the guy that wins a bunch of money at the casino loves that casino because that's his slot machine is the best one. But somebody talking about why Bitcoin is valuable because of XYZ, because of the economic properties, because of the monetary policies behind the reason of value, I think that goes a long way as well. Forbes saying Bitcoin can never work is kind of like me saying Bitcoin absolutely can work. But when I say Bitcoin can work because it has sound money principles, because it has the economic freedom that the majority of our world, I just heard 53% of Canadians are within $200 of insolvency. That's due to a lack of economic and a lack of monetary principles that we teach in our society and that our society holds to be true. And so Bitcoin comes in and fixes that to an extent. Those are the reasons why I like Bitcoin, not just because of the value of it today.
I want to circle back. How does Bitcoin, first of all, what economic principles, this is obviously a matter of opinion, this will be your opinion, but what economic principles do you think have contributed, you're talking big picture, to a situation now where more than half of Canadians say that they're in real financial hot water? They're on thin ice, so to speak. And how do you think Bitcoin addresses whatever you would identify as the problem?
So we live in a society that incentivizes spending because we all have accepted inflation. We all accept that our $100 today will not be worth $100 tomorrow. And we've accepted the fact that in order to combat that, we have to gamble with it or invest it, or we have to spend it as fast as possible so we get the maximum bang for our buck. And you see this throughout society. No one really talks about what a car costs anymore. Cars cost X amount bi-weekly. I went to go buy a car quite a few years ago, and I asked him how much it cost, and he told me how much it cost bi-weekly. And I said, no, how much does it cost? And he didn't know. He had to go check how much the car cost because all he was taught to talk about was the bi-weekly payment. You can finance a couch. I buy a t-shirt online and I can pay for it in 3 low monthly payments of $8. We live in a society that is taught and incentivized to overspend and to overextend themselves because what's $8? What's another $100? But when you look at the real picture, that's damaging to a society that gets over leveraged. Now, how Bitcoin fixes that? Bitcoin runs in a sound money principle, or in a way that we are incentivized to save, because Bitcoin, if the last 10 years are any indication of Bitcoin's value, you can assume Bitcoin will be worth a lot more next year than this year. Imagine how stupid I feel for buying a car at $5,000 Bitcoin, right? That car has now cost me 15 times more than it should have.
Do you know why I don't feel sorry for you one bit is because I've already told the story that you offered me 4 Bitcoin to host an event 4 years ago, and I took the cash instead, like an absolute idiot. So I don't feel sorry for you in your car. But you know what, Adam? In all seriousness, it's a great point that you're making. It's the idea of being like the currency. Do you call it? Yeah, it's cryptocurrency. I mean, I guess you can call it currency or whatever you want to call it. But the entity itself is the savings plan, whereas cash is not a savings plan.
That's exactly right. We have to, with our existing money, like there are people that are trained gamblers that have to invest our money for us because we know our money will not be worth as much as it is today in 5, in 10, in retirement years. Whereas Bitcoin holds a deflationary principle, which means there will only ever be a capped amount and there is less of it that gets introduced into the market over time. This is exactly the opposite of our fiat money. And these types of principles are what give it the scarcity needed to continue having that price rise. You look at like housing and property. The reason housing and property and land goes up is because there's a finite amount. And that argument falls down a little bit because you can always build up, cities continue to expand, yada, yada, yada. But there's a reason that, land is a better investment than just, bills and cash. And that's because land, there's only so much of it. Whereas money, I mean, we've seen there's 70% of the M0 money supply in Canada has been printed since April of 2020. So in the last 12 months, 70% of money in circulation was printed, which is very, very problematic. That is a hyperinflationary state. You look at what happens to hyperinflationary states like Zimbabwe, it falls down. It doesn't work very good.
So let me point out the obvious. And by the way, you're getting a bunch of tough questions on the live chat, which I know you love, and we're going to get into these. You invite them, and then a bunch of people curious about the flamethrower in the background. So we'll get to that at some point. I'm assuming if you had any problem talking about it, you wouldn't have put it on camera on Real Talk. So fair game. But let me point out the obvious as well, which is that Bitcoin or any crypto is not guaranteed to keep rising, and so we cannot guarantee that it's a great savings plan because it's guaranteed to rise. In so many ways as it has done in the past, it could plummet. It could become irrelevant, like many other things. I mean, I just watched a really fascinating documentary about Blockbuster Video. I'm not trying to draw parallel lines between the two, but what has once been mighty is not guaranteed to always remain that way. I mean, it needs to be pointed out.
Absolutely. And I think too, I don't mind that comparison actually, because it showcases that the legacy system that was once there, that chose not to innovate, that chose to continue doing the same thing over and over and over again, got absolutely demolished by something that came in with better principles and did it better in Netflix. I think that Bitcoin is the Netflix of money. I think that Bitcoin is the email of communication. I think that Bitcoin is the Twitter of social media. I think that as we look at our legacy traditional finance system, we've seen them overprint money. We've seen them have really, really reckless policies in terms of how money is introduced into society and how we facilitate the ability to access that money. And Bitcoin does the exact opposite of that. So I would say that Bitcoin is actually the newer technology. And you're right. In the last 10 years, year and year, time and time again, Bitcoin has continually increased. If you zoom out on that graph, it is like this. There is a bunch of this in the middle. And so you definitely have to make sure, like I said at the top there, it's not something you buy and sell in a month for massive gains. It's not something you remortgage the house for in order to make a quick buck. This is a long-term kind of journey into what financial sovereignty could be. And I think that recognizing that, doing the research into what you believe in terms of like philosophically what you believe money should be, I think that's what kind of makes Bitcoin an interesting point of view.
One of the Bloomberg pieces that I was taking a look at, it was published just on Sunday. Salisha Mohsin is the journalist talking about how the president's team, Biden's team, is eyeing what they're calling a potential threat from China's digital currency that's just been introduced. Heidi's got an interesting question that kind of ties into this on our live chat. She wonders if you think that Bitcoin is endeavoring or aiming to be the new gold standard. I've seen some financial commentators say that they think that the U.S. dollar has, not they think, I think it's undeniable, but the U.S. dollar has enjoyed a privileged position as the standard, and that this could change or this could flux. The idea of China's digital currency is prompting so many spin-off conversations, including to some commentators suggesting that 2022 Olympic boycotts could be based in part on the implications of a digital currency at the Olympic Games, which is wild. I have to imagine you're keeping an eye on this story.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's important to remember what money is. And there's a difference between money and cash. What China's digital currency is cash. It's a centrally controlled, unlimited supply of something that holds value. That is just, we already have that in Canada. We have a Canadian digital currency. It's called the Canadian dollar, right? When, the sponsors of this show, I doubt are dropping off bags of money. And if they are, don't say it on the air because you'll probably get a few visitors to the office. But likewise, no one's paying their rent in cash. No one's buying their groceries in cash. I mean, especially right now, we already have a digital currency. The reason Bitcoin is so valuable and Bitcoin is so promising is because it holds the monetary policy that all of those centrally issued currencies don't hold, which is the fact that it's deflationary and that it's scarce. And those two things, I think, will forever be the outlier for Bitcoin's value.
So what do you make of China's plans for a digital yuan? Like, like the experts are saying it could topple the dollar as the world's dominant reserve currency. Others are saying that this comes back to the Olympic Games idea, is that a requirement to be able to access or spend, let's say, that digital currency could be part of a plan. It comes across, if a pleb, a civilian like me, tries to explain the concern, it's going to come across as a conspiracy theory, because I should probably have somebody in a tweed coat and a bow tie explaining it. But basically, the Coles notes, people are saying this is the greatest way to get it to spread, to get it to become more prolific, more prominent around the world, is to introduce it at one of the world's biggest gatherings, probably the world's most high-profile gathering, that type of a thing. What sort of an implication do you think that China's digital currency will have on other federal currencies and on global markets?
Yeah, so that's where I see it being a different conversation, because the Chinese yuan against Bitcoin are apples and oranges, but definitely the first country, the first global superpower to issue a token, which is what the digital US dollar will be, is a digital token that can be transferred peer-to-peer or in some fashion of peer-to-peer. That's going to put the biggest threat on the global kind of monetary policy. Right now, US dollars holds title as the reserve currency, so to speak, because it's most widely accepted worldwide. You go to Mexico, you don't even get pesos when you go to Mexico anymore. You just take US dollar. In Europe, not so much. They have the euro. In Australia, definitely not. They're not taking US dollars. But bigger organizations do accept the US dollar, and that's kind of what their dollar is pegged against. When you're doing an international trade, the US dollar is kind of that central unit of account. And that's because it's the easiest to send. Now, it's the easiest of a very, very difficult legacy system in order to send. Bitcoin solves all of that. However, what the digital yuan was going to be is they're going to have the ability to send that a lot easier, in hopes that eventually people start saying, you know what, that US dollar is way too difficult to send. The unit of account doesn't make sense anymore. Let's change our unit of account over into the digital yen. I'm not sure how to say it properly. All I do is read. I don't listen. But.
Well, you just say China's digital currency and then you're good. But how do you, because I remember, I'm both young and old. I'm a young old guy, or I'm an old young guy. But I remember the transition, like when the loonie came in, right, and replaced the dollar bill, and the toonie came in and replaced the $2 bill, and I remember specifically there was an ice cream shop called My Favorite Ice Cream Shop in Calgary. Rourke Hilford was the owner. My dad went to high school with him. He was like a national news story because he would not accept loonies. He would turn people away from his store. He would not accept loonies, and he had like stickers made with it was like the Ghostbuster, but the loonie was in there, and it was comical. But he was serious. He was not joking. He would not accept the loonie until something happened. I don't remember what. I was a kid, and basically it's like it's currency. You have to accept it. But people were like, "What am I going to carry coins around now?" And so this is like the physical manifestation of the conversation. Like instead of having dollar bills, now you had to carry coins. We've and probably way back in the day, currency was what like beads and other things of value. Like maybe in the early days, it was rocks.
It was rice.
It was
rice. It was
like
chickens and cows.
Yeah, like whatever. So through human history. And if we want to get really esoteric, we could probably talk pre-humans about what qualified as currency and how people exchanged value. But we have seen that evolution. So what do you think? I mean, if we're not even talking Bitcoin or is Bitcoin in the mix, like 50 or 100 years from now, like what does it look like? Like nobody has $100 bill would be nothing 100 years from now, but like $1,000 bills or whatever. Are people gonna have bills in their wallets? Are people gonna is everything like how do you think big picture way out there a century from now? How are people buying and spending and saving, and what does it look like?
Yeah, I think that Bitcoin has those properties. Now, everyone, like you talked about credibility. I've been in this industry for 8 years. I would like to think I'm fairly credible. Ryan, I'll let you speak to that. But I'm also biased because I'm in the Bitcoin industry. So just, it's important to, I think, to
that's
note that.
obvious and implied. That's obvious
Okay,
and
fantastic.
implied. Everybody has a bias. You're a big Bitcoin guy. There you go.
So I think that I believe in a world that knows no financial borders. It is ridiculous that to go to the States, you have to go through a process of getting a different currency. I find that laughable. That is incredibly archaic and unnecessary by any sense of the imagination. If you and I wanted to go to Europe, the biggest barrier would not be traveling these 7,000 kilometers or however many kilometers is going to be. It's not, defying the laws of gravity and flying through the planes to get there. It's how much is my bank going to charge me to get a different currency? That's ridiculous. So I definitely think that a financial borderless society is, I'm not talking 50, I'm talking 15 years down the road. I think that our society is definitely understanding the benefits of what borderless communication sees. And it's only a matter of time before we realize the benefits of borderless money. And definitely Bitcoin has borderless money. A Chinese digital currency will not be borderless money because it's going to be centrally issued or centrally controlled. And centralized currencies just cannot be borderless. It just isn't how it works.
I don't know the background of this question, so I wish I could ask it more with a bit of a preamble, but Heidi's wondering if you think that Bitcoin adds to wealth disparity.
Wealth disparity. So I think that anyone can get involved in Bitcoin. I think that Bitcoin is inclusive and not exclusive, meaning if you want to get a job right now, you need to have a bank account to get paid. No employer is paying cash. In fact, it's frowned upon by the government. You can't pay your taxes in cash. The government does not want you using cash. So get a job, you need to have a bank account. But to get a bank account, you have to go through this permissioned system with an address. So if you're homeless and you have no address and you can't get a job, it's this consistent negative feedback loop, which is a problem, in my opinion. And so I do think that from that aspect, creating an inclusive system that anyone can participate in, if you own Bitcoin, you have a vote in how the monetary policy is distributed. That definitely is a big step towards, I think, income disparity. I think income disparity is Heidi the same lady that asked had the comments about your hot take on no tax for rich people. And if so, I don't think income disparity is going to be quite addressed in that way. But I think that it's leaps and bounds better in an inclusive system than what we currently see today.
We've got some questions on the environmental impact of Bitcoin mining. I know that you've talked about this before on the show, but I know that you'll be happy to address it again. And a lot of people are also talking about, I've heard this from, and this is a really interesting angle, gamers. Or like code Sam just popped up and his eyes widened. But
I know exactly what you're about to talk about.
Well, why don't you put it to Adam, because you know what you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Sure. Hey, Adam. So I am a professional video editor, and I can't get an NVIDIA Quattro to save my life because all the Bitcoin miners and all the Ethereum miners are buying them up.
Okay, explain to the audience. But what is that?
An NVIDIA Quattro is a really high-end graphics card. Bitcoin mining is an algorithm that's very GPU intensive. So if you do things like gaming or editing video, you need need a high quality graphics processor in your computer. It is also the same piece of computer hardware that's used in writ large a lot of cryptocurrency mining. We're not just talking about limited to a couple of different ones.
Why can't manufacturers make more of those though? Like,
I don't know, Adam. Do you have a take on this?
do you know? Is this?
Well, there's without question, there's a raw material shortage. The storms in Texas had, like, my dad owns road construction. He sells road paint, or is his main product. And road paint this year is like impossible to get because of the raw materials shortage in Texas, because of the winter storms in Texas. So like raw materials that go into manufacturing are, I didn't realize this, like, lots of what we own and use today is built and made in some fashion from Texas. So when Texas gets closed down, everything kind of gets ruined. But manufacturers can absolutely make more. Manufacturers don't want to make more because with an increased demand and a limited supply gives better pricing. There's also just like economies of scale. The factory can only pump out so many. So like from a manufacturing standpoint, that's one thing. I take your point, Sam, that, as a video editor needing video cards and having an industry come up and gobble all those up because they can make, money off of that is a bad thing. But taking a step back, does that not mean, and I apologize, Ryan, you could charge more for your services because now your costs have increased.
All right.
And so now you are more valuable. Your machine is more valuable because of the cards that are existing in there.
But then this is contributing to inflation, which is not necessarily the greatest thing.
Well, inflation to an extent. But I think that when it's hyper, down to a specific industry or down to one specific item, it's not inflation. It's that item getting more valuable. Because the graphics card is more money, and so now Sam is more valuable, or his services are more valuable. The microphone is not necessarily more valuable. The space that you're in is not more valuable. The art behind is not more valuable. So I think that inflation, is kind of when everything increases in price because of something else decreasing, which is money. And so I would push the same kind of question back. Amazon comes in, builds that 2.5 million square foot building here in Edmonton, and now there's no steel and no wood in Edmonton because it's all going to Amazon. I think that that happens in every industry. It's funny, I think, that it can happen in subsets because of Bitcoin, but I think that's kind of just the way economies work. No one's upset that the toilet flusher no longer has a job because of a flushing toilet. And when you look, the taxi and Uber debate, throughout time, innovation has caused ripples throughout what we know to be legacy type of systems. And I think that this graphics card is kind of a blip in time that will eventually even itself out.
Yeah, I'm coming from a traditional broadcast media background, having worked in newspaper as well. Those are two other classic examples. Interesting comments going on here on the text line. I don't know. Some of these points, shots against Bitcoin, I don't know if they're legit. Like, someone says, well, poor people can't afford a computer to buy Bitcoin.
Well, you can, like, to that point, like, you can have Bitcoin on a $20 smartphone. Like,
sure,
Bitcoin can be held anywhere.
Yeah, I'm just saying that, and I'm not trying to be dismissive of the concern. But I think that's a little bit. It just feels to me to be a stretch, to be honest. That angle on it feels like me to be a bit of a stretch. Let's talk about the environmental impact of this. I'm not going to try to explain what Bitcoin mining is. And I think that people's eyes might glaze over, even if someone as compelling as you, Adam, tries to describe it. But basically, the idea is that it's known that there's a finite amount of Bitcoin, but it's not all yet been mined, which means that massive servers, like towers of servers, are constantly mining Bitcoin. And it is a huge draw on the power grid. And a lot of people are concerned about the eco impact of Bitcoin mining. I know you've been on the show before. People have heard your past interviews. You've talked about the ecological impact of mining for gold, and you've drawn a comparison there. But what do you say to people that come in or that talk to you on the street or that hit you up on social media, Twitter, YouTube, otherwise, and present that valid concern about the environmental impact of all of this?
Definitely. I think that Bitcoin is the only industry that the entire industry, or Bitcoin mining, the entire industry is incentivized to find greener, cheaper power. Like you said, the comparison to gold is very good. I'm sure that like an electric, excavator would be beneficial for the environment. The technology is not quite there yet, but let's say it gets there even. That's fine. I would argue, though, that there is no way to mine gold without ruining the earth. Hard stop. There is a future in Bitcoin mining where 100% of Bitcoin mining is done through solar power, in which case there is exactly 0% eco impact. And I think that when you think about that, there's no other industry in the world that has an opportunity to be 0% eco impact. We could literally have Bitcoin mining done through solar or wind or renewable sources, and that would be a benefit to the organizations. You look at like oil and gas producers have to pay money in order to be eco-conscious. Bitcoin miners are actually incentivized because the cost of their product decreases. Now, it's a bigger infrastructure cost, of course, but when the cost of your ongoing product decreases, that's a net positive for the industry, and that is something that Bitcoin has, and that holds true.
I wish people could see my Google searches while we're doing shows, like live searches. Because I think it would be pretty funny that would actually be a great Twitter account, is just my Google searches during a live show. But I'm Googling right now how much nickel is in a Canadian nickel, because I'm just curious if we want to talk about ecological impacts of currency. I don't even know. I mean, I have no idea. So I'm reading it right now. The larger base metal version made of nickel, called a nickel, introduced in 1922, originally contained 99.9% nickel. Nickel metal. These coins were magnetic originally due to the high nickel content. I mean, it's just one example. It's not exactly like, a fastball that's going to end the inning here, but it's interesting. I mean, if you want to start talking about ecological impacts of currencies, how many trees have fallen? I don't even know how they make dollar bills anymore. I think that now they're supposed to be
plastic, man.
You can't rip them
it's
now.
Like,
you can't. But yeah, they're plastic.
They're not biodegradable, or there's it's not good for the environment. Let alone you look at a credit card or an ID card. Like, how many credit cards does the average person have? I mean, it's got to be more than one, more than two.
We're all destroying the environment, every single one of us. We are. I mean, I just look around.
Bitcoin doesn't have anything to do with that.
I'm not putting it on Bitcoin or anybody else. This is just a moment of introspection. When people want to talk about the environmental impact of Bitcoin, which I think is a great question, a fair question, we should ask about the environmental impact of everything. And it's part of what we talk about. We took out our garbage and recycling is picked up on Tuesdays. So I put it out this morning, and I'm just looking at our recycling. I mean, we feel like we're doing our part, I guess, a little bit, by at least patting myself on the back for separating garbage and recycling. But if you look at even just the packaging, I feel like it's my once a week reminder of how much packaging we use and how much garbage we create. And you look down the alley and you're like, gosh, this is just our street. And we just consume. This is like my moment of this is me, the philosopher. This is me, the annoying guy with his shirt off and an acoustic guitar on a Hawaiian beach with three people sitting around listening to his great takes on life. But we all just consume so much. It's just, we do. There's nothing. It's not a question.
Absolutely.
It's not a question. It's just a statement. Can you show us, can we fire up this flamethrower behind you before we say goodbye? What's the actual deal with this thing?
I don't think I got any. Okay, ready?
Yeah. What is it, first of all?
Oh, it's Elon Musk's thing.
Yeah.
I bought 3 of these when they first came out. So he made, I think, 30 or 50,000 of these. Okay. And sold them, and they're just really, really hilarious. I'm not sure if I'll
back up so we can see
it.
Yeah, fire it up. Oh, jeez.
It's live on Real Talk, baby.
Live on Real Talk. Your home temperature the temperature inside your house just went up 2.5 degrees in a half a second.
Yeah, that kind of felt nice. Actually, it's kind of chilly down here, so that was pretty good.
You use that to start the barbecue, or what do you use that to start campfires?
Oh yeah, it's mostly a gimmick and a toy. It's a great fire starter. Big pallets and dead brush and whatever. A little bit of gas, and it just goes to town.
Amazing. Man, every time I talk to you, I end up with my face hurts from smiling. Appreciate your passion. Love the way you try to make things accessible and understandable to those of us that don't do this as our job. Thanks for making time for us today.
Thanks so much, Ryan. Thanks for having me. And as always, happy to come back.
Thanks, buddy. You can follow Adam. He's got his own YouTube channel, and you can follow him on Twitter as well, @AdamO'Brien_. Of course, I link to him on my tweet every morning. We tell you guests are coming on the show, and you can find more about Bitcoin Well under the sponsors tab at ryanjesperson.com. Also wanted to remind you that we're so grateful to be partnering with the team at Westworld Computers. We told you yesterday about one of the Real Talkers that reached out to Sylvan Lake, needed a charging cable for a MacBook back from 2013. And bing, bang, boom, they connected with Westworld on Twitter, and we saw it shipped out same day. Love it. Kareen, let us know how that goes. Daryl and his team have been proud of the customer service that they've put out there for more than 40 years as an independent, family-owned business, bringing you the best of the Apple, Mac lineup. And of course, they have their discounted, gently pre-owned lineup as well, with all the software when it's applicable reinstalled and the warranty reapplied. Go check out Westworld Computers. Also, a big shout out to the team at Alta Moving and Storage. If this spring means a move for you, look no further than Alta Moving and Storage. They're proud to be owned and operating, employing local folks, which means that the neck of the woods you're in, you may have some specific unique concerns. They want to solve those problems with you, and they won't stop until you're happy. These pod-style moving containers, they drop them off. You can fill them up at your leisure, and then they'll pick them up, drop them off at your new destination. You take your time, you take the stress out of it, and if you want some hired hands as well, some hired labor, they can provide that too. Of course, long and short-term storage as well at Alta Moving and Storage. So did that address, or did that adequately answer your question? The audience would quickly realize, Sam, that the reason we get you to ask those questions is because I'm not intellectually capable of understanding the implications on the vid. No, of course you can be humble on the video editing community and on the gaming community and otherwise. But did Adam's comment or his interpretation of it address your concern?
I mean, I think that the gist of what Adam said, which is true for all products out there, is that, you know, if you sell a service that requires a certain piece of equipment and that piece of equipment goes up, you can charge more for your services. And that's kind of where he was going with that. Yeah, a bunch of scarcity in the video card market has been created by, you know, a rush for people to get into crypto mining. And that's probably not going away anytime soon. Adam and I might have very different things. He sort of cites a little bit of like supply issues, but I also know 3-4 years ago when crypto was really starting to rise, like that's when the crunch on graphics cards, that's when you go into a shop and they're like limit 1 per customer, limit 2 per customer. That's when all those signs went up. So this has been a persistent issue for a few years, and I don't think is going away. I think that, you know, where Adam landed and where I think we're all kind of landing is we just sort of accept, okay, GPUs have another use now. It was this thing that had this narrow scope of uses. Now we've added this other use to it. It's going to create more demand for this product. So, you know, just like if everybody decided to suddenly get into road construction, there'd be a run on shovels. It's just to kind of use an Adam O'Brien analogy. And then I started looking at his flamethrower and trying to figure out if I could build one, but we'll put a pin in that for right now.
Please be careful. I have to say things like Real Talk does not condone, endorse, or encourage anybody to construct their own butane or propane or other fuel.
It was propane. I saw it.
But yeah, I've got a buddy that builds potato guns.
Oh, those are so fun.
And if you're lucky enough at a mile marker birthday, like at your 25th or your 30th or your 40th or whatever, he will show up with a custom built potato gun for you. But it's always given me the heebie-jeebies a little bit. I won't explain exactly how you build them because I don't want to be responsible. But there's a lot of sort of like
I won't either.
There's a lot of just like you spray a little bit of this in here and screw it on it, then you fire the igniter switch and you make sure you're not standing in front of it, and it's kind of like somebody's gonna get. I don't know. You probably could get killed by a potato if it hits you. If it hits you in the,
you could absolutely get killed.
If it
by
hits
a
you
potato.
with enough velocity in the right place from close enough, death by potato would be a real. I'm frantically trying to think of a great pun, but you know I can think of better ways to get mashed. Would that be?
Oh, good.
You'd be fried. No, I'm trying too hard. Kim says with Bitcoin, I just don't get how something that literally is mined and needs servers is an intangible thing I can't see or touch or control the value of it. It's tangible and it's intangible. Kim, you are not alone. I still try to. I learn something every time that Adam comes on. I appreciate it. Michelle says, "Is digital currency corruptible by like really smart computer or math people?" Michelle says, "Seriously, I know nothing." This is where blockchain comes into it, and blockchain, and Adam's gone now, but blockchain basically is like a database, and they're blocks that hold digital information. When the block fills, they add another one to the chain, but it's decentralized. So everybody can see nobody can change the blockchain. Like you can't go if you're like the senior VP of the bank and you go in and like change someone's bank balance on the computer and nobody sees you do it, and then it's your word against theirs. This can't happen that way. Blockchain is decentralized, right?
And I mean, as I understand blockchain, it's like blockchain and cryptocurrency need to be put in kind of separate buckets here, because blockchain is the underlying principle behind cryptocurrency. Blockchain basically just says, we have a bunch of information and we're not going to store it in one place. We're going to put this information simultaneously in copies of itself on servers all over the world, so that if one person tries to change it, there will be all of these existing files that say, no, that's not the real change. And blockchain is an incredibly powerful computing technology that so much of the world is starting to run on. Bitcoin, I think, just kind of made blockchain popular.
Yeah, Bitcoin uses blockchain, but
Correct.
blockchain is used already. I mean, by
There's
a ton of applications.
Yeah.
And like Cyber Neon says in our live chat right now, think of blockchain as Internet 2.0. We will all be way more familiar with blockchain in years to come. I think safe to say. What a show. We're already 2 hours in, 2 hours plus, and we're going to leave some stuff on the table for tomorrow. It's going to be a great show tomorrow. We're going to talk to a couple of a law school students and a lawyer. I'm a lawyer. We're going to talk to a few of them about a rumored, have you heard about this? A 45% tuition increase. Have you heard about this?
I have.
At the University of Alberta's Law School, a lot of people are saying it's going to undo a lot of the good work that's been going on around making law, the practice of law, the industry more equitable, more inclusive. It may turn off women or Black and Indigenous people of color from studying law. These are the types of angles we're going to explore, plus other news of the day and more of your emails to talk@ryanjesperson.com. Thanks for making Real Talk a part of your day, and we'll talk to you soon.